stars be with you.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Energetic Principles podcast for a very special yearly edition of Gray Crawford joining me for the year ahead forecast. And of course, this year we will be doing 2026. 2026. Wow. Whew. We just went over the notes for an hour, and we're so there's so much going on in 2026. I feel like we say that for every single year, but really, it is. So let's welcome Gray back for the seventh year in a row. Oh my goodness. Thank you for joining me again, Gray.
Yeah, thank you. It's amazing to be doing this 7 years in a row. So we essentially started this going into the year 2020. And so there is something really amazing about hitting that 7 year mark of doing these every year since then. And while there's always been a lot, I feel like every year we've talked a lot about, oh, there's so much going on this year. There's so much volatility and change. And really, though, that's definitely the case for 2026. And there's way too much for us to talk about in one episode unless we were here for many hours. So I know we're going to just focus on some of the big major themes and some of the particularly intense periods rather than actually attempt to try to go through the whole year or talk about everything in depth. But
Yeah.
2020 was a year that astrologers had circled for many, many years ahead, and 2026 is the same thing. It's not the same kind of astrology exactly like 2020, but like 2020, 2026 is a year that if you were just somebody that was looking at ephemeruses like a few centuries ago, you would be able to look and kind of be like, well, since the outer planets were discovered. So once we had the outer
Yeah.
planets, maybe I should back that up to especially including after Pluto's discovered and people realize Pluto's important. But if you somehow could know many centuries ago that Pluto was important, as well as Neptune, because of the outer planet influence, that's I mean, there's other things to talk about that are really significant, even if we weren't bringing in the outer planets. But when we consider the outer planets, 2020 and 2026 are ones that just really stand out.
Yeah.
And there's been
Absolutely.
sort of an unpredictable wild card thing. I feel like ever since we started doing this, like we knew 2020 would be really intense for many reasons. There was Saturn Pluto coming together, there was Jupiter Pluto coming together. The south node of the moon was with
All
Saturn and
that.
Pluto and Jupiter, so we knew there were going to be eclipses. That also happens to be the planetary south node. What was so powerful, especially to me, was that it was the Saturn's south node, Pluto's south node were also, and Jupiter's south node, they were all on their own south nodes, as well as the south node of the
Oh,
moon,
yeah.
all coming together with these eclipses. And then, anyway, this year is a different version. But again, we have all these big outer planet configurations coming together. And the thing that really stands out about this year is the unpredictability is still there, and there's still very much a wild card element to me of like anything can happen in many ways. Even though with these cycles, we can always see there's certain patterns that are coming in, but it's not like there's something that definitely between 2020 and this year has really been taking form, and there's something that really is taking form this next year. There's this whole new quality of a type of era coming in and configuring and forming, and there'll be more change to come after that. But so much to me has always just been interesting about the doing this across this time period. Like so much has been building to this upcoming
Yes.
year, and then to see what would actually end up happening in 2026. And even though we there's elements which we'll talk about that happen in 2025 that relate to 2026, it wasn't really the whole uh, idea of what's going to actually happen. So It's a
Yeah.
time of just really intense change. And like 2020, it's a kind of year where probably there's major events happening that are forever associated with the year 2026 in the historical record, like just like 2020 has like events happening that we're always going to know about that particular year.
Yeah, I mean, looking back to that time and thinking about it in context with what we're going to be talking about for 2026 and how they're both so meaningful in their configurations, is that 2020 to me, like it did have obviously the record books. We all experienced it. It changed the whole world on many levels, but it was almost like a jackhammer to reality. And here, 2026 is there is like a creation element to it because obviously
Hmm.
we're going to be talking about, as Gray had already mentioned, the outer planet movement that is forming a significant cradle. We're going to be cradled by the outer planets in the sky in 2026. And they're doing so all at the beginning of new signs in fire and air, which is more faster, outward,
Hmm.
initiating, well, not initiating such in the cardinal sense, but Saturn and Neptune will be in Aries. So we
Hmm.
do, Jupiter is in Cancer. So we have that initiating power there. So it has these like bookend feels to it, but to me, 2020 really feels like a dismantling, whereas 2026 feels like a building or a creation, which can be just as volatile as dismantling, because there's a lot of uncertainty that goes with it when you're starting fresh.
Yes, creation is really important and aligning with what you want to create. And there's also going to be a whole element of great collective changes
Yeah.
happening and collective notions of reality, which have already been warping with the Saturn Neptune influence because they haven't exactly come together yet, and because they are coming together in the first degree of the entire zodiac, right on that Aries point in the tropical zodiac of um, great. I mean, it's just so potent for something coming in um, extreme and really changing things. That's going to be really important to keep in mind. I mean, one thing with me and all of these cycles, and there's always astrologers you're going to hear that are going to be saying that certain things are definitely going to be happening based upon past cycles. And we'll bring up some examples like that. And there's certainly historical patterns. And there's with cycles and historical cycles and the way astrology comes in with cycles, there's always these patterns that are playing out. It can often look like something's going to happen, and many times that what we are thinking could happen with the astrology is in fact what is going to happen. But there's always also this multivalent
Mm.
expression. And importantly to me is that I do not personally believe that everything is completely predetermined. And so there is an element of this if you don't believe everything is completely, and even if you do believe everything's completely predetermined, you need to engage with what you want to be doing anyway, irregardless of the fact. But that emphasis you're just saying on this year of creation is really important. It's going to be a year of great collective movements and things sweeping through and things that will feel overwhelming in the sense of like there's this much larger entities and world powers and governments taking actions that feel and in many cases are, out of your personal control. But there's also likely to be, especially with how we're going to talk about, we got Saturn and Neptune in Aries. We're going to end up having Jupiter come into Leo, another fire sign to trine them. Uranus coming into Gemini, which is another very active movement, really
Yeah.
ramping things up. Pluto's already in Aquarius, which also brings a lot of idealism. I always think about it's important to think about what's going on collectively with like the moment of time you're in and how you can be moved to do things that aren't really lined up with your own personal integrity and responsibility. And so forth, and your own sort of moral compass that you can navigate through things. And so that's going to be really important as we get into talking about all this for everyone to be keeping in mind, because likely, like you're saying, with this fire, we've had things in water and earth signs with the outer planets for a while.
Yeah.
And with this new Jupiter Saturn air era that we're in, firmly in now, which automatically signals a lot of change and fluidity and movement, and fire and air signs coming in. The way 2025, we did experience things rapidly changing really fast in ways that really, some of it went beyond my expectations. And there were other elements of things I wondered about changing that didn't change, in fact. But that same kind of quality is going to really be coming in, and likely more extreme as we go through the year. And so,
Mm.
really, as we're coming to the end of this year and going into next year, I think something we'll also talk about is the more you can just clarify what it is you want to be doing with your life and adjusting to all these bigger collective changes as much as you can, but essentially really focusing in on your own life and your what you can affect in your local community and or your digital community, if you're somebody tapped into that kind of thing too. It's going to be really important.
Yeah. Yeah. We're essentially fanning the flames here, you know. We're like jumping into the ring or jumping into the fire, because it's one of those things where, 2026, it's like if you're not intentional and you're not aligned with your passion or your hearts, you like the world will pass you by, or you'll get swept up in whatever it is, the fire that is coming, so to speak. So there is this real feeling, especially with Aries, there's like, as you had mentioned, Saturn and Neptune coming together there. And I just finished an 8-part series with Saturn
Yeah.
Neptune conjunction. So there's plenty of, connection, or if you want to go back and listen to some of that, there's that. But I mean, you think about Aries and it being, the birth or the impetus of fire and spirit and things, the strike of the match. And it's Aries, Mars energy is going to jump right in. Mars has a mission. Mars wants to, um, I mean, a, I want to use the word achieve. I don't know if that's the quite word I'm looking for, but essentially there's movement and there's momentum and we are going forward. And so and that's the purpose of 2025 in many respects, is a lot of us did feel like we're flying by the seat of our pants with some of the changes that we saw when all the planets made ingresses for short periods of time into what 2026 is going to look like. But then we had to slow the reins and go back into this earth and water landscape to retrograde back, sort some of our own feelings, sort out our, physical realities, jobs, finances, etc. And do a lot of internal work. Like I feel like 2025 gave us a taste of something that we really had to internalize in some way to prep us for what 2026 offers when it is go time. And so I hope everybody out there, I know I've been doing the work, I've been putting in the work. And yeah, so it's gonna be big. And we're not gonna, as Gray said before, there are signatures of a lot of change and a lot of volatility, but we don't necessarily want to doomsday things, because that's not what we're here to do. And it's hard to say. Like as Gray had mentioned too, we do see certain patterns that we can pick up with astrological transits. But there still is, in my mind, this, free will, and life is what you make of it. And yeah, there's a lot of, I don't know, I feel like there's a lot of on my end, I feel like there's a lot of positivity and hope, just for what could be. But of course, life throws a lot of things at you at the same time. So how are you going to navigate that? How are you going to get your Mars energy on? The Aries, the perceptive qualities of all the air with Pluto and Uranus in air signs. Like this is where we're having a momentum. So it's like screw our heads on straight, be ready to innovate, have a good plan, and jump into the fire, sort of thing.
Yeah, and people that aren't even astrologers are already talking about this. There's a lot of people already talking about great economic instability and fears about what could happen with the economy. You don't need to be an astrologer that knows some of these astrological patterns to see all the big global conflicts happening. And although we are breaking out into this multipolar type of war and power dynamics, there's clear threats of increased war and conflict. The USA has already gotten more, well, has been doing military things for a while, but
Ever.
there's definitely, as we're recording this right now, there's things in the news about certain military strikes and that have happened recently, and um, threats of more strikes happening, like in Venezuela, for example. But
Hmm.
so one of the things about this is this history of, for example, of Uranus and Gemini, which I think most people know at this point, right? With Uranus and Gemini, and it goes with Revolutionary War, it goes with the Civil War, it goes with the United States being in World War II. Neptune and Aries went with the Civil War. There's things that we can look at with Jupiter and Leo that lines up with past U.S. Conflicts like the Gulf War and invading Iraq. So there's all sorts of things like that, like in the United States, that, as we go through this year and whatever gets going and how that could lead into 2027 and what happens that year. But knowing that we're coming into a time where there is potential for a lot of that this polarization we're already seeing could be continuing. Um, there could definitely be increased global conflicts, but you never totally know, though. To me, I always keep it open to what actually is happening and tracking it rather than jumping too far ahead
Yeah. Well, and we have to
with what
live
you're
through those
afraid is going to
things.
happen. But what these things all do, which goes with what's also happening this year, we have many things simultaneously going through this next year that are also equally extreme in terms of potential breakthroughs in human consciousness and creativity
Yeah.
to actually really extreme levels. And you can note that there is there is such obvious interest in the collective in all sorts of mind-bending breakthrough consciousness topics, which we can easily track now just by if you look on YouTube and what videos are getting, these incredibly huge numbers of views. And there's so many things coming in with that, as well as all sorts of the things coming in are cycles that also go with changes in consciousness and changes of reality that we can't even really comprehend.
Yeah.
Like going from thinking the Earth is the center of the universe to a heliocentric universe is an extreme one. There's so many people talking about, like, is there going to be disclosure about what now they're called UAPs, and I don't actually know if we'll get to any of that actually happening, but just these ideas of, are these like aliens, is it some kind of interdimensional thing? It's all kinds of things that can go beyond what we can even conceive of. And there's an incredible synchronicity also at this moment as we're talking, this object, Three Eye Atlas, which is this
Mm-hmm.
interstellar object that there's been lots of theories about. There wasn't an especially helpful NASA live stream recently that didn't really give that much
I know.
information, but it did at least bring up this idea that there are saying that, I think it's this comet, and it's likely something from obviously outside of our entire system and something even much older. So there's this really ancient, I mean, it's just really, it's a particularly interesting
Yeah.
intercosmic messenger from this ancient time that's coming in, that, and it's going to continue, my understanding, next year, kind of going outside of our, it's going to still be moving away through different planetary orbits and stuff, um, in our system. It's, as we're talking right now, it's going to be coming I believe, closest to Earth around the solstice, right when we have this really powerful new moon coming up at the end of December,
Mm,
which is like also just really fascinating timing.
yeah.
But that's such a symbol to me of a potential for just totally warping and breakout, things we weren't even able to fully conceive of where it's going. If
Yeah.
that, yeah.
No, I mean that makes complete sense, especially when we think about this, 2026 has the formation of Uranus and Pluto coming together in their trine. And it's not just this year, it's going to continue all the way through 2028.
Hmm.
I always think about there's an Aquarius North Node solar eclipse conjunct Pluto and trining Uranus, the Uranus Pluto trine exactly in January of 2028. And so to me, there's just this whole time period of such things that you're speaking of, the three-eye atlas, or like, we just don't know what sort of information or innovation or flyby passenger from an ancient alien time that is going to, circumnavigate our solar system. Like we just don't know. Like that is sort of the beauty of this time, is that there can be information or experiences or visitations that come that can change our whole perception of life. And we're talking about sort of the outside example of that, but I feel like it's very much on a very basic level for us living individual lives within our own brain and our own nervous system, that we're all going through these experiences for ourselves too. We all have certain glass ceilings in life, and we all have some sort of encasement around our barrier of belief or perspective. And this is what this year offers. And really that whole time period, I think, is innovation to our own perception of our realities on an individual level. And that's huge if you're in creation time and we're at the start of new things, because you really need a beginner's mind to be able to, start fresh effectively and be able to navigate things that come our way, or that might not. I mean, we'll all be affected somehow, but it might not affect us directly with some of the bigger life movements. But we'll have to learn to pivot and think about things differently or go this way. Like that's the beauty of this time, is it helps, I don't know, but yeah, just break the glass ceiling of certain perspectives, individually and globally as well, which is exciting.
Yeah, and it's typically during times of great breakdowns in society and culture and economics and so forth that that's what often is just part of creation, with giving birth to all sorts of innovation and new ideas and new ways of being. And that's going to be something that we're going to definitely be experiencing this next year. And the astrology is definitely, to me, exciting in terms of just being really powerful for creation, like you already brought up. I mean, it's really extreme in terms of that. And hopefully, if there are stuff that you really do want to be building and developing and creating this next year, that it's going to be a time where if you're in the right place at the right time, and not affected by these bigger some of these bigger collective conflicts that could be going on, and even if you are, you could still be doing something. So it's definitely really, to me, really exciting about that kind of potential for this
Yeah.
year.
Yeah, because we all have to, no matter what's going on in the world, we all have to live our lives in some way. So
Hmm.
how we're going to do it when the context is essentially up to us. We all get up in the morning, we all make our own choices, of like what we're going to do with our energy for the day. And so it's exciting to have that creation energy swirling around, and especially if it's around things that are completely new. I know I'm personally entertaining going down some paths that, I mean, it's not completely new, but I'm definitely a novice at it and I want to explore it more. And so it's like, what can you get into that does have this fresh, new
Hmm.
beginning and you never know where it can go. Like it makes me think of things like for like an artist example of like Grandma Moses or something. Like, didn't that woman start painting when she was like 70 or something? You know what I mean? And most of us would be like, well, I don't know, pick up a paintbrush at that age and can I do this? Like, what's the point? And then she becomes this world famous painter, basically. So
Yeah,
it has that
absolutely.
quality of like, you never just start. Just start and see where things end up.
Yeah, definitely following whatever is bringing you joy, making you feel really alive and creative and just really
Inspiration.
inspiration. And I think those are going to be really important practices just to be even more intentional about than you may already be.
Yeah.
Really putting yourself in those places, doing tracking what is making you feel excited and inspired and joyful and creative and following that, getting yourself in that state and practice as much as possible.
Yeah, and I think that's where maybe the Saturn Neptune piece comes in a little bit at 0 degrees Aries. Saturn does help us bring the discipline. Neptune helps us with the vision or the dream or that vague sense of like pull towards something or that maybe you're from a spiritual level you want to engage with. Um, so I feel like and I feel like a lot of people might be going getting these pulsations right now is like we're recording this because we are in that lead up to the conjunction, which will happen on February 20th of 2026. And so basically, just for a quick recap of dates, when we think about we have Neptune moving back into Aries on January 26th. We have Saturn moving back into Aries on February 13th, about a week before they make the conjunction. We have Uranus moving back into Gemini on April 25th, and then lining up to eventually square the nodes, which will be a big part of this. Well, not a big part, but a part of this year that we will definitely notice. We have Chiron, who's going to be moving into Taurus as well on June 19th, which is a shift there, which will be more felt in 2027 because Chiron in 2026 is kind of going to do what basically Neptune and Saturn and Uranus and did this year, where it gives you like a little taste of it, and we get to taste what Chiron and Taurus looks like for a hot second in 2026, but 2027 is when it will get in there. And then Jupiter will ingress into Leo June 29th. So it's really up until, about that solstice point or about mid-year that we have all these outer planets moving in, making their official shifts into new signs. So I feel, and then July is just we're gonna be feeling all of these connections. But yeah, the ingresses. Any thoughts on that, Gray, as far as like sort
Yeah,
of
I
that?
mean, like you mentioned there with all those ingresses, part of that tracks back to a little bit of what we just experienced in 2025, which is that we had Neptune come into Aries at the end of March after having been in Pisces since like 2011 and 2012. And then at the end of May, around May 25th, Saturn went into Aries. And Saturn stayed there till like beginning of September. Neptune stayed there until later in October. Now they're back. But there was a little bit of this where we got that experience of them moving in there that was then amplified in the beginning of July when Uranus went into Gemini.
Mm-hmm.
And that was right around the time that Saturn stationed and Neptune stationed retrograde, and they got really close. I mean, so close. I want to say it was like 13 or so arc minutes. Almost, it was so close to an exact conjunction that didn't actually happen. But July is a period. July and August would be a couple months where we did have them all in there, and that's definitely something for you to think about and what was changing, what was starting up. But of course, now they've all come back, but then we get them going back in for good. And the thing that you brought up that is, if we have to single out one thing that's the most important thing out of everything is like the greatest theme of the year, it is that Saturn Neptune conjunction. That is the one cycle, big cycle ending and beginning. It's like a 36, 37-year cycle. It goes back to 1989 when they previously came together. But it's always a big deal. But because, again, it is the first degree of the tropical zodiac, which honestly, the whole reason I practice a tropical zodiac is essentially the first degree of the Aries in the tropical zodiac, because in the tropical zodiac, that marks that incredible moment of equal day and light around the entire planet. And we have this intersection of the celestial equator with the ecliptic, the path of the sun. It's like the node of the sun. It's this point of increase where the sun in the northern hemisphere, we have it ascending, going up to its greatest height at the summer solstice then. So it has all this power of manifestation, this incredible symbolism of increase and amplification. And we're throwing this conjunction down right at that degree that always warps reality. It
Yeah.
always goes with the way we look at things really changing. It often goes with great popular insurrections and revolutions based upon, again, economic instability and people not having enough and getting really driven to rise up and insurrect and overthrow things and overthrow an order. Um, it's so powerful that that's happening right there. So that's really to me at the heart of everything changing. But then it's also, like you mentioned, as we move into the summer in the northern hemisphere, or basically the end of June through July and August. I mean, it's really going on beyond that even, but that's especially powerful. A few months there where we get Jupiter coming into Leo, and we just had one Uranus and Neptune. As we're talking right now, they have already formed a couple exact sextile aspects, but they'll do another one in July. So we have all these, whereas Saturn and Neptune are starting a cycle, we have all these other major outer planetary cycles that were so beautifully tracked by Richard Tarnas in his book Cosmos and Psyche, that are all coming together. So there's Uranus, Neptune coming into a sextile, which goes back to their conjunction in 1993, which is when we're talking about Uranus. So we're having, and this is the first time we've had a major getting up to like a sextile, not like a semi-square or something, like a sextile aspect between them since that 1993 conjunction. So all that great change that came in the early 90s, which among other things goes with the internet. That's a thing where the last Saturn Neptune in 1989, as well as Uranus Neptune in 93, those two cycles all kind of coming together this next year have a lot to do with another, wherever the internet's taking us. The
Yeah.
internet's is now become the reality for like almost like the reality for so many people, and we know something major is going there. But that Uranus Neptune sextile is really important because that is one of the more liberating elements of the astrology. As Richard Tarnas, like I mentioned, he calls it like the spiritual Prometheus. That
Mm.
Uranus and Neptune coming together. It's a sextile, but it's still the first sextile since that conjunction. So it really does speak to the great hope of humanity and inspiration of the imagination and what we're capable of creating with our imagination. There was a previous conjunction between them in the early 19th century, like, at the height of like romanticism and Keats and Shelley's and so forth. And also, it's often gone with great scientific leaps and advancements and this hope of we can, create this technology that could potentially liberate us and save us, which is also the great hope for what is coming in with this technology, that in spite of the fears many have about it, that it really can create liberation in many ways. And that element of liberation is really coming in strong with this Uranus, Neptune. Because also it's so we have the Saturn Neptune forming, but then we have Uranus coming in, creating like a sextile with it. Then we simultaneously have that same Uranus coming into an exact trine with Pluto, which goes back to their middle of the 1960s conjunction. So we think about the 60s and counterculture and all these revolutions, and again a time of reality dramatically changing. It's another, typically it can be great people taking power, but it tends to have a big liberation movement impact also. There's so many counterculture liberation movements that were born in the 60s when Pluto Uranus came together. They've had other things going on in their cycle. This is not the first major aspect, and especially in the 2010 to like 2017, 18 or so, that was like Pluto and Uranus in a square aspect. But now we're getting them in a trine. It's like very flowing trine, which is like really bringing that in there. We also get exact sextiles between Neptune and Pluto. That's not a new thing. That's been going on for a while, but we haven't had them exact. I'm forgetting the dates right now, but since like the 80s was the last time we had them like exact. They stay in a sextile for a really long time. We've had a break from the exact sextiles between Neptune and Pluto, but they're coming back again. And that goes back to like an 1891, 1892 conjunction in Gemini, which is all about the everything coming in
Yeah.
with the turn of the 20th century, which is huge. So like there's all these great cycles converging, with that Saturn Neptune at that zero Aries point being kind of the real heartbeat of the erupting time. But as that's forming, it's just really, that's why this year's so powerful from the outer planetary perspective, is that cycle's forming and it's in this total synergy with all these other cycles at the same time. And then as Richard Tarnas really emphasized in his book Cosmos and Psyche, what's often really powerful about these greater outer cycles is when the faster planet like Jupiter comes in and activates them. And that's what's happening in the end of June, July, August, and the rest of the years. We get Jupiter and Leo coming in and sort of setting fire to the whole, like it just ignites the whole thing. And that's where there's likely to be, great movements coming in. And so with Jupiter and Leo, there's a bunch of other cycles. Like there's a 2020 cycle of Saturn and Jupiter that started. We're going to get the Saturn Jupiter trine. There's a 2022 conjunction of Jupiter and Neptune. We're going to get the Jupiter Neptune trine. There's the 2024 conjunction of Jupiter and Uranus. We're going to get the sextile. So there's a whole another layer of that. And there's a bunch of other elements, everything we're talking about, even on a smaller scale, that go back to that 2020 time when we had like Saturn and Jupiter and Pluto all coming together, because they're all coming into aspects, So this is why it's such an eruptive year. Yeah.
Yeah. It's very unique in its configuration like that is building up on all these grand conjunctions of like, and why not to overlook the Uranus Neptune or Neptune Pluto, because they move so slow. It's like, what does it matter if they get together in a sextile? Well, it does matter
It
because
matters when they get
it's like
exact to the degree.
degree,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah, that's the difference.
Yeah, because they have defining moments of like epochs, so to speak, sort of like how you brought up in the late 1800s with the conjunction of Neptune and Pluto.
Neptune and Pluto,
It
yeah.
was just kind of like its own era age, because really the first
Mm-hmm.
time that had happened was about what was it, 900 years earlier, 1,000 years earlier, was it was the second time
It's like
Pluto and Neptune conjunct in Gemini.
it
But
was, and I'm forgetting the date of it now, but it's like 14th or 15th or 16th century. I wish I were remembering that right
oh,
now.
it's the I'll tell you. That's what. So 1892 was here I'll share a visual for. Oh, screen's okay. It doesn't want me to share my screen. It's like, no, no one needs to see this. Um and so before then, It's funny, no event found. There is an event found. I've looked it up before. I want to say it's like 1000 or 980 something. It's a long time ago. But before then, the Pluto and
So I got it. It's 1398. So 1398, 1399. So I was wrong by I was jumping up a couple of centuries. 14th century, not 15th or 16th. So 1398, that was the Gemini one.
yes.
Now there was one back in like 905 like you're talking
Oh, maybe
about,
that's what I'm thinking
which
about.
is in Taurus because they'll stay in the same sign for like a really long
Yes. Like
time.
really long time, like long, long, long
Yeah,
time.
like if many like 6th century BC they were happening in Taurus and they're happening in Taurus earlier than that, and then that 1398 one is
That's the
significant because that's the
changeover.
first Gemini one.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people that well not there's astrologers that really put a lot of importance on that 1398 Gemini conjunction
I
of
mean, it
really
makes
bringing us
sense
into this, yeah, this
into the
kind of new,
modern
yeah.
age as far as humanity is concerned.
Yeah, and
So
even
it's
historians look at that time period. So I mean, it
yeah.
lines up.
So it's a
Yeah.
different air age that started than the one that we are speaking
Hmm.
of with the Jupiter Pluto
Yeah.
excuse me, Jupiter Saturn cycle, which also corresponded to that time period too. So not only was it Neptune, Pluto. Anyways, we're getting far away from 2026, but just a little context, right? If we're having these sextiles between these big moving, slower moving planets like this, it's very significant. And we had our most recent one on November 20th with Uranus and Neptune together. And I feel like, I mean, at least
Right.
in my own life, and I'm talking to other people, there are these like pieces when you speak of like liberation and spiritual connection and understanding. There's these like things are starting to click. They're not quite there yet, but there's just these really big pieces of that are necessary in sort of this like you had brought up sort of this hope dynamic. And I think that's the beauty of these sextiles coming in when we have something like Saturn and Neptune together is because or Jupiter opposing Pluto coming up, which we're going to talk about, is that
Mm.
these sextiles offer us the liberation. It offers the hope. It offers the innovation within something that could be more difficult or trying with change. It, like it's almost like throwing the universe throwing some bones, to the people to be like, no, but here's all these other ways that you can work with what is happening in your life. Because, like
Yeah.
you said, with with Saturn and Neptune at the 0 degree world point, like there are going to be the powers that be and world leaders, like it is like clockwork that if there's activity, like potent activity at 0 degrees Aries, for the most part, there are somewhere in the world, some world leadership is changing. It could be different depending on, what's going on in different countries, different eclipse patterns, different, what have you. But there's always going to be something. So, given within that, then how do we as a collective work within the changes that we're seeing? How do we work with them individually? And I think those sextiles do offer us that opportunity that is very in unique place and time. The saying is like, "What a time to be alive." Well, kind of right now is.
That's
It
what this
is.
year is. Yeah. Yeah, and even so Saturn Neptune itself when they come together tends to signify empires falling, leaders changing, revolutions arising, even the revolutions that don't form and then they don't necessarily maybe they're suppressed or shut down, but they still create a big change. What else does comets always? I mean, we're talking about Three Eye Atlas, like this extreme, like the comet of a, well, I think it's like the third was a third one we found now with the technology we have now. But it seems to me like the symbolism of this comet would be even more extreme as well as signifying toppling of leaders and regimes and things like this. So I think one of the things that you were just bringing up there is really important as we're talking about this and these collective changes and what we're all individually doing and processing, even with this November 20th date you just gave, which was when we had the Scorpio new moon, and it was a Mercury retrograde conjunction of Mercury and the Sun and Scorpio at the same time we had the exact sextile.
Yeah.
That's actually a thing that's going to continue in 2026 because all of the Mercury retrograde periods will be in water signs, which I know is something we're going to eventually talk about.
Yeah.
But all the Mercury
Bring it
retrograde
forward.
periods being in water signs, they also are lining up with the big, hot pivot periods that we're going to focus on today, which is the Mercury retrograde in Pisces comes in right after the Saturn Neptune conjunction, right after the first eclipse in Aquarius, like February 25th. Then we get a Mercury retrograde in Cancer coming later. Like it starts right when Jupiter's going into Leo. It's going in July when we're having the whole cradle
You'll see. You'll
configuration
see.
that
Yeah, the
you're
cradle.
mentioning.
Uh-huh.
I also like calling it a cauldron,
Oh, I
cradle
like, yes.
cauldron.
I
Yeah.
like cauldron.
And then we get a Mercury retrograde in Scorpio coming in while we're already in a Venus retrograde in Scorpio, and that's coming in during this really heated up, volatile, intense turning point of the year in like November,
October,
especially.
November.
Yeah,
Yeah.
October, November. So these Mercury retrogrades coming in the water signs really do speak to all this internal work and change. And as we're people listening to this now, by the time this comes out, the big grand water trine might be over with, but we'll still have Jupiter in Cancer and Saturn and Neptune in Pisces, and the fact that we just had this Mercury retrograde in Scorpio combining with it really had an amplified quality of what water can do, but it really can dissolve things internally, and that can help bring things can end up reconfiguring, and this whole new presence and transformation and transmutation can actually end up emerging out of that deep internal watery process and change, and what we can start imagining differently with our life. And that is so important,
Mhm.
in addition to the Saturn Neptune conjunction that you were just talking about, because that also really speaks to what story we're telling, what are we willing to believe about our life. And there is there's elements that it's not to me that everything we can just do whatever we want, like law of attraction, free will by any means. And as an astrologer, I definitely think there's threads of fate and destiny at work with all kinds of things going on.
Yeah.
But we don't want to discount what we can do with our power of thought and what we can imagine with our life. I didn't realize this is going to turn into such a Richard Tarnas hype job. I was just realizing I have his Prometheus book right here. This is the
Oh,
book that was Prometheus the Awakener, where he came out based on an earlier essay saying that Prometheus is like Uranus, being the person that really promoted that idea of connecting Prometheus to Uranus. And that liberating potential of Prometheus, I think, really is something to keep in mind um, with this year coming up, and using it to break free into some new directions for yourself and break out of whatever hasn't been working for you, because things are going to be changing and falling apart, and the best way to is just engage it and move into it, and so much potentially can be changing with so many different ideas and ways we're looking at things. The power that each of us individually has to take part in that is going to be really important, instead of giving into hopelessness and thinking that you can't affect anything and you just need to give up and go along with what the narrative is being told to you. So that's not what you want. We really need that Uranian quality coming in this year. Yeah.
I love that, especially when Uranus tests the nodes. I can see that happening.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it makes me think of, to go back to the Mercury retrograde piece, and even when I think about Mercury retrograde and, Aaron Sullivan likening the inferior conjunction and on being sort of the Promethean phase of the Mercury retrograde
Mm,
period, and having that quality, and really feeling that quite recently with the new moon that you had brought up in November 20th uh, in Scorpio, right? So we're getting a taste of these water retrogrades, and how life-changing they can be when you sort of take that Promethean quality into, Mercury's, Mercury is definitely an alchemical planet. Like like Mercury can change your life basically, especially Mercury retrogrades, because they're like, moving bits and pieces around and, refining us as individuals. And I think one of the big things that's so potent with going through these couple years of Mercury retrograde in fire is it was, reconfiguring and doing alchemy on our inspiration, on life direction, on, what are we inspired and passionate to do with our lives? Like where is this all headed? What means purpose? And, in that kind of fiery sense. And now it takes the all that processing that we did in those areas of our chart. And now it's like, well, let's bring it into the watery spaces. Like, how do we rectify, the head with the heart, with our emotional state, with the inner workings, that with complexes that hold us back from the fire? It's one thing to have a goal and inspiration, but if there's shadows and complexes and emotional issues that hold someone back from being able to do that, then you can only have so much inspiration. Then if you got to kind of reconfigure that part. And then same with water too. It's very connective in that quality, where fire is more of like, maybe about me, or like, what I want as an individual or feel inspired to do. Water has that, well, who am I in relation to the world, to my family, to my significant others, or, and so that can be changing and shifting too, especially with Venus retrograding in Scorpio as well
yeah,
too.
exactly.
Yeah, so a lot to be reconfigured in those zones.
Yeah, so if people think about your Pisces house of your chart, the Cancer house of your chart, and the Scorpio house of your chart, Mercury's going to be taking you through
Oh,
this alchemical
you're going through it.
process 3 times. And it's pretty amazing that those 3 times, like I think we picked out like 5 periods to focus on to talk about, which we'll
Yes.
do here shortly. But 3 of those 5 times, Mercury's retro, the 3 Mercury retrogrades just line up with them. And that's not even really the reason why we were picking them. It's just the Mercury is just completely, like Hermes is completely tuned into these big portals of change this next year. And each time we come into, not all of them, Mercury's retrograde, but in a lot of them, 3 really powerful points of the year, Mercury is retrograde at the same time, really taking us through this process. And there's a couple other, so there's also then the superior conjunction of Mercury when Mercury's moving really fast and direct. And most of those are in Earth signs. So there's one
Hmm.
in Taurus and one in Capricorn, no, one in Virgo, that also come into pretty key points. So while everything else is moving into these outer planets are moving into these big fire air signs, Mercury's doing this big watery dissolution, and I really like the other superior conjunctions, the Taurus and Virgo ones, for really helping things come into form then and being more pragmatic and practical. And amidst all these big changes, I think it's the Mercury cycle is going to be a one to really tune into this year for sure and work with really intentionally.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, we are going to get into, so what we're going to do is we're going to do kind of like our top 5 hot spots for the year. But before we get in there, we got just one last mention, because we really have not talked about one of the biggest pieces of the year, which is Jupiter opposing Pluto
Right.
in Leo. And we're going to talk about that more perhaps in the hot spot moment of it, but just to talk about it now, because I did go back and look at, and I'm like, well, when was the last time Jupiter in Leo opposed Pluto in Aquarius? Because, when we think about Leo and Aquarius as a sign axis, like Leo, there tends to be a lot of, correlation with leadership or people in power or the king, or the head of states versus like the people and what's created for the people. So I was just curious what would come up. And it was such an active time for the United States when Jupiter opposed Pluto back in August, well, it's September 2nd, 1789, all the way back there. But basically, through the summer of 1789 to about the summer of 1790, when Jupiter was retrograding back and forth and, coming into contact with Pluto. And also, there was a Mars retrograde at the time, which is foreshadowing some Mars retrograde. We're going to have Mars retrograde in January of 2027. That's going to coincide with some of these Jupiter movements. Not exactly with Pluto again, but still, there's an interesting correlation of these cycles coming together. But just to give you some, an idea of some of the things that were happening during Jupiter Pluto opposition, on the exact opposition, the United States Department of Treasury was founded. Which, you think about Jupiter and Pluto are both planets of wealth in my mind, big wealth, big stores of wealth. But okay, so laundry list. The United States Department of War was established during this time, which it's now called that again, apparently. But so it's interesting, harkening back where it's now changed the name. There was a proposal for the Bill of Rights that was adopted by the House of Representatives. We got our first Secretary of the Treasurer. We got the Department of State was established. We got the United States Marshals Service. We got, the first U.S. Secretary of State. The Department of War established the First Nations Army. We had the first meeting, or the first time the Supreme Court convened. The United States Census was created. The United States patent system was created. The post office was
Post
created.
office
Like,
too. That's
I
yeah.
mean, there's just so much that happened. And then in France, there was, the storming of the Bastille that took place right before Jupiter opposed Pluto. And really close to the opposition was in France was the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen. Very close to that date. And by the end of the transit, that's when Louis XVI accepted a constitutional monarchy in France. He was like, okay, all right, there could be more rights for you people. So, I mean, this is big. It's like, at least in
Yeah,
the
it's huge.
US, it's a lot of what our country is founded upon
Yeah.
was created during this period.
Yeah, that's really extraordinary. And it certainly goes with the fact that we already see that in the United States with lots of constitutional precedents being
Yes.
broached and tested by the Trump administration. There's already been a lot of previous precedents overturned. There's a lot of court cases with things being called unconstitutional that's been going on. So all of this is going to come up. We're the fact that this
Yes.
cycle is repeating itself checks out that we can clearly see that something is going on with this. And this and other cycles also really connect with this idea that whatever is ultimately dismantled and changed this next year as part of this process, it will also bring about eventual abilities to start reconfiguring and seeing how things come back together
That's
again
right. I
with
mean,
whatever does end up happening. But it clearly shows that this is all up for review and to be working out again.
yeah. So once again, we are in this creation period, but in order to have creation, a lot of times there is destruction or reconfiguration to what once was. So we will definitely be looking out for that in 2026. So Gray, are you ready? Shall we get into the hot spots and look at some times of the year that we can focus in on?
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's do it. So I'm going to go ahead and share my chart here. Let me get my I know where I want to start. So, should have had this ready. Okay. Well, hopefully it'll share. Okay, now it'll let me share. It wouldn't let me share before for some reason. Okay, so we're doing clickbait style where we're like top 5 hot spots of 2026. This is it. Except it won't be in a 5-minute video. It's probably going to take us another hour or so to get through this. But number one, and not in any particular order per se, we're just going in chronological order, is in January. So January basically we have this Venus. Let me see if I can get my annotation out. That could be helpful. We have this Venus, Sun, Mars conjunction taking place. We have the full moon in Cancer, which is near Jupiter here. But basically, this period of time, we have, the conjunctions of Venus, Mars, and the Sun together. There's synodic cycles turning over. Venus is getting ready to conjunct Mars herself. And a full moon is lighting it up. Yeah. Gray, what's your first hot takes on this time period?
Yeah, this is really amazing for the timing of the full moon to be coming in sort of at the ultimate death kind of point. I mean, it's like these
Yeah.
cycles are almost all coming together. Because remember, for those watching that are new to cycles, Venus moves faster than the sun moves faster than Mars. What we're seeing here is Venus and Mars are both too close to the sun to be seen. So they're in their ending cycles, underworld phases, getting ready to be reborn. Venus is moving fast to the sun. The sun is moving to Mars. So they're all about to come together and start a new cycle. I think it's 3 days later, January 6th, that Venus and the sun start a new cycle. And then the next day, on January 7th, Venus and Mars starts a new cycle. And then a couple days later, on January 9th, Mars and the sun start a new cycle. So within a week of this full moon, they've all started new cycles together. So that is amazing for the full moon to come in like right at that moment, like so close to this happening. And it's also amazing that Jupiter is retrograde in Cancer. So Venus and Mars are going to be big deals this year. I mean,
Yes.
they're always really important in astrology, but they are absolutely crucial to what's going to be going on this year. And they're very much part of our focus with our hotspots. So, what's going on here is Venus, of course, orbits in between us and the sun. So, she has two conjunctions with the sun, which we'll experience this year. She has one later in the year when she is retrograde, she's in between us and the sun. She has the other one, which is what this is, when she is, it's called the superior conjunction. She is moving fast, she's moving direct. She is on the other side of the sun from us, which is also where Mars is. So Mars is also lined up on the other side of the sun from us. And if we were looking at if we had a cool like solar system view of this, we'd see them, lined up together, like our planet, the sun, and then Venus and Mars, and their orbits all lined up. But then, as close to us pretty much as it ever gets is Jupiter, because Jupiter is retrograde, which means Jupiter is actually, getting as intensely close to our planet
Yes.
as Jupiter gets in its orbit. And it's lined up, so they're all actually kind of lining up together at this time. And then right as it's all coming together, the full moon is completely illuminating it. So that it's a really especially powerful configuration in this way. So, what does this mean? I mean, I think about Venus and Mars so much about creation and the eros of creation and what do you want to create with your life. Now, there is, of course, the the contrast between them, that Mars goes with strife and conflict and separation and fighting for things, and Venus is more about wanting to unify things and harmonize things and bring things together. But Mars can be really creative and artistic. Venus can go with creating wars and conflicts as well. They're not just limited to those little keywords, foundational principles that we hold about them. And I always think with them coming together that Venus is like, what do you want to attract? What do you really want to receive? What brings you joy? What brings you pleasure? What do you desire? What, this creative expression as well. And definitely also harmonizing, unifying things. Whereas Mars is more like, what do you want to fight for? What do you want to go after? What are you willing to go off on your own? What do you want to protect? You need to be so courage, is involved there too. So their cycles are always really powerful to track when they come together and form aspects with one another. For them to both be doing it at the same time with the sun,
Yeah.
it's not like a totally rare thing that never happens, but it does. It doesn't happen every time. We haven't had one of these since it was around August 24th of 2019 was the last time. So actually, not long before you and I recorded our first one of these, and because that was sometime in 2019, leading up to 2020. So we haven't had one since 2020. The last one was in August of 2019, and I was going back through it. There's actually an interesting pattern I need to learn how to track more, but it's essentially like not every three, but every three like groups of them, because sometimes they
They get a
conjoin
retrograde.
multiple times. So it works out to like I don't know if it's 6.5 years, but there is one in 2019 so the one in August 2019 was also Venus and Mars together close with the sun. There was one in April of 2013, one in October of 2006, one in June of 2000, and one in January of 1994, which is interesting because it was also in Capricorn, obviously in a similar place during the Uranus Neptune time. And so there is, when we're talking about this early 90s Uranus Neptune conjunction forming, and we're coming into this important aspect of it, this lineup here has an element of it that goes back to that time period in the beginning of 1994. But the fact that Jupiter is involved, the fact that this full moon is lighting it up, really to me speaks as this powerful moment of illumination, revelation of what you want to create. It's amazing that it comes so close to the beginning of the year. So it's
Yeah.
absolutely perfect for like the classic New Year's resolution and getting a lot of clarity about what needs to die, what you need to let go of, what needs to release, and what do you really want to focus on and bring in with your creativity and desire this year.
Absolutely. Like to me, this speaks of pivot points with creativity on both like, because we're seeing this water and this earth together and we're forming the clay basically. And it's probably going to be a significant pivot point around just relationships of all kinds. Your significant relationships, relationships, bureaucratic relationships. When we think about Capricorn as a sign, and Cancer there, especially since this full moon, I think, is on the US's sun, if I'm
Mm,
correct. So I'm sure this will be a
that's a
big
good
moment
point.
for US relations. But I think to speak to what you're saying about how powerful this is for creation as Venus and Mars meet, as Venus and Mars are both rebirthed in the solar rays, and it's all under the domain of Saturn at the tail end of Pisces, which is so close to Neptune.
Hmm. Yeah,
And
they're so close. That's the other thing. Yeah,
they're
that's a
so close. So
they're
they're
so
so
close here. Yeah.
and at the tail end of Pisces, so even what you were saying before too, not just the creation part, but like also, I mean, the big I think we were both talking about the big piece of like having to let go and let, certain water wash and dissolve things
Hmm.
and, so that something can be born or so this gestational period. Because conjunctions don't necessarily mean, I mean, the full moon could definitely bring something to blooming to the surface, but it can also close things. So this could
Hmm.
be a closing point to some extent to open a door or to be rebirthed into something as well. So it's a very magical period in my mind that is will move bits and pieces of our relationships, our emotional selves, our spiritual selves, but also our, worldly dynamic, finances, jobs, what it is we create, where our productivity and energy, what we build, what we have built. I feel like all that could be affected through January 3rd is the full moon, which happens to be my partner's birthday. So
Oh wow,
I'll be living under this for a while, but and it
that's nice.
really, the whole conjunction and the rebirth in the sun really continues on through the last quarter around January 10th, which last quarter will then square this position
Mm,
too from Libra. So I'm going to say this hot spot
yeah.
of the first half of January, especially up until that
Yeah, it's
new
good that you
moon.
put that because you can see there how the well, that's really powerful there when it goes into Scorpio. But yeah, how they're all coming together. Like they're all kind of staying together now. Mercury's even getting involved, and they're
Yeah.
all going to they're all opposing Jupiter like at the same time as that lunar cycle comes to an end.
Well, and
And
so
and they're all
I
in
know.
Capricorn, and Saturn's like less than
Yes.
3, then even like getting into 2 degrees away from Neptune at the same time.
So
Yeah.
now I knew that I was going to do this and I'm going to try to stop myself, but only
Yeah.
because I just wrote all the horoscopes for January of
Ah,
2026. I do have to say the second half of January is interesting. Like this is the hot spot, but also this is, we see this lineup in Capricorn, right? That Gray's talking about with, all the personal planets there. Well, they all move into Aquarius with it.
right. Oh,
So
that's
there
important
is
to bring
this.
up to people.
Yeah, there's a massive Aquarius shift in late January where we see all these planets moving over Pluto. So to think of those two kind of bookended together, like what is the Venus and Mars being rebirthed into the sun in this, cardinal quality to then be the plutonification, I think I'm just making that word up, of all the planets that follows it is very powerful.
Yeah, so again, especially if you're a Capricorn rising or Aquarius rising person, or you have something else like Moon or Sun or something else important in Capricorn or Aquarius, this is going to be really important to think about. But for all of us, first whole part of January, there is this big stellium of Mercury, Venus,
Yes,
Sun, Mars
Mars.
in Capricorn that then starts shifting into Aquarius. And then as you showed there, it's around January 23rd that Mars goes into Aquarius. So then we end up with they're all in Aquarius with Pluto.
With Pluto. With Pluto. Yeah, they're
So
all have to cross over the underworld, basically. So they get one underworld with the sun, right? And then they get the the Plutonic underworld after that. So it's like double an interesting double purification, so to speak, but in different
and while
signs.
this is going on, not we're not going to keep going through the whole year,
I
but
know we will do this.
it's
We're not
close
gonna do it.
to beginning of February, then Uranus stations direct, which is also kind of part of a shift, which, Uranus is stationing direct in a sextile to Saturn and Neptune, and all these planets are in Uranus. I mean, are in Uranus, in Aquarius, moving to Uranus. So it's there's a lot happening here in those first like couple months of the
Yeah.
year. And I think it's important while we're definitely that one hot spot would be like the one super key one would be like that first 10 days of January are really extreme with things really bringing in a lot of impetus to the new year, although it's going to be a lot of like internal work and realizations. But the Capricorn activation of your chart, followed by the Aquarius activation of your chart, is something to realize is going to be really strong.
Well, and great. I think that brings us right to our second hot spot because what I'm
Hmm.
hearing as you speak of that is there is this great focalization on Saturn.
Hmm.
And Saturn is just heading over, it's at the tail end of Pisces. And then basically on February 13th, I believe, is when
Hmm.
it moves back into Aries.
Yeah.
And this starts our hot spot period essentially because
Yeah.
it it's so close to Neptune, which will be February 20th, but right before
Hmm.
that, we have on February 17th, we have a solar eclipse in Aquarius. That so
Right.
we're in this hot spot period of Saturn and Neptune, this conjunction ruling this eclipse. We're getting the first taste of an eclipse in Aquarius because the nodes are still in Pisces and Virgo, but we are in sort of that transitionary time where we start to see new eclipse stories enter, which is big. So when again we're in this creation part that we keep talking about and shifting of stories, this moment, February 17th. 20th is the conjunction. Of course, 2 weeks later, we have the lunar eclipse in Virgo. So yes, Gray, tell me what you think.
Well, it's a big deal, of course, to have a solar eclipse in Aquarius because in the recent years we've been having them in Pisces and Virgo. We were still having some Aries ones come in. We don't end up with a solar eclipse in Pisces. It just
I
ends up not working
know.
out where the node's too far away. We
Ah,
end up with a Pisces new moon on March 18th, but it's not close enough to the node to be an eclipse. So we jump into an Aquarius eclipse. So that's another reason why this Aquarius activation that we're talking about, it's already going to be going on for you, but then something gets really at the end of this big Aquarius transit, something really comes out here. So there's going to be some kind of new Aquarius part of your chart story coming in here. And that's another element that's really interesting for the beginning of this new year. And there's like this whole new era being signified by Saturn and Neptune coming together. The eclipse is in the sign of Saturn. So that's the other thing that's so big is that it's an eclipse ruled by Saturn as Saturn
yes.
is only 3 days from the exact conjunction with Neptune at the first degree of Aries. So there's a major like we can just expect there is something really important coming in here. It may be what you're already developing and working on, but because of just being an eclipse, Saturn, Neptune, it could be unexpected, and especially because of it's an eclipse that is square to Uranus. So when I was speaking of this Promethean liberating influence, an eclipse squaring Uranus isn't necessarily going to be comfortable. It could be very disruptive, and we'll certainly see that with collective events. But again, it can really wake you up. And this is something that can really catalyze some extreme realizations and movement. And it's there'll be another eclipse later in the year. We'll get to eventually as one of our other ones where it's a lunar eclipse in Pisces. It's also squaring Uranus. So Uranus, as you mentioned, we'll eventually talk about how Uranus will be squaring the nodes. But this is like an interesting like before we get to that we get Uranus squaring an eclipse before the
Yeah.
nodes actually switch. So it's that's another pretty fascinating element of it.
Which I think is interesting because I remember when we did the year aheads when we had the nodes in Scorpio and Taurus, and
Mm,
were speaking so much about being eclipsed in fixed signs, especially when I think I was talking about Saturn Uranus square when that was going
yeah.
on. So here we're back again at getting eclipsed and feeling the also the
Mm,
Uranian quaking and shaking in an area that it's been touched before. Saturn and Aquarius dealt with Uranus in Taurus basically. But it's a different, eclipse is a different vibe here. So it's like we've done a lot of shaking and quaking in Scorpio and Taurus. held on to the Saturn and maybe in the Aquarius part, but now the eclipses are coming through and it's like, okay, well, Pluto's here now. Mars is hanging out. So there is this very disruptive force in whatever Aquarius is for, in your chart, or for the representation there. So I think
Yeah, sorry.
Oh no, I was just gonna say I think there's a closing element to it too, Gray, because kind of what you
Mm.
brought up of that we are leading to a lunar eclipse that will square Uranus, but in mutable signs. So it does have this quakening, but it's at the end of it, so it's almost like a new that involves an ending or wrapping up of something. Like it's at the end of signs.
Oh, that's true too. I also think that definitely could be going on because where this will go to the last. Oh no, maybe it isn't actually the last lunar eclipse in Virgo, but another lunar eclipse in Virgo. But one thing about the fixed signs you mentioned that's a really good point is that fixed signs can be resistant to change. I know that's something we used to talk about with those previous ones. But when fixed signs do change, we're talking about typically like long-term changes. So that's another that like long-term change brought by the fixed signs and getting the signs to really be shaking and moving again is a big part of this. And there's something here too, again, when we're talking about new innovations, new thought, consciousness. I mean, that's stuff that can go with Aquarius, humanitarian concerns, human rights, civil rights, um, decentralization, this decentering, like what's on the margins, decentralizing influences. Things like this are going to be getting to be picked up here. I mean, later in the year, we'll talk about the North Node will actually come into Aquarius and that will even warp this and amp this up even
Yeah.
more. But it's all starting right here, yeah.
Well, there's
And
definitely financial instability, perhaps,
financial
with it,
instability for
as you're
sure.
speaking. Yeah.
Yeah, that's another
Saturn,
element.
Neptune with it. Yeah, definitely. It feels volatile. And the decentralization. I mean, isn't there talks right now about like bringing
Yeah,
stable coin? Stable coin, how Uranus and Taurus is that? It's like it's fresh coin, but it's also stable to like help fix our problems. And so, I mean, something like that could go down during this time period.
yeah, and that was definitely that Genius Act that was passed was a major thing this past year that went with like Uranus. I think it was around the time Uranus went into Gemini. It definitely was a big thing as part of all of that you're speaking to.
Yeah. So Venus on the North Node, I find intriguing. Any thoughts on that within the context of our eclipse? I mean, she's not necessarily ruling anything, but didn't know if you.
Yeah, well, what part of what that is she's there with Mercury and we did mention this already, but like 8 days later Mercury will station retrograde and she'll be part of that too. Um
Mm,
I personally like her being there. In Pisces, I mean, with the North Node makes me think the combination of that with Saturn and Neptune coming together definitely makes me think about this like inner dreamscape. And on one hand, we're gonna have to be watching, like being pulled into illusions and being wrapped up in an illusion and is what we want really realistic or real
mm.
or but there's going to be an element where we kind of have to just be working with this and following these processes and continually checking in to you know what is real or what can we really realistically do with our life in a practical way while at the same time stretching,
Yeah, I know. It's
stretching the
paradoxical.
mind to be kind of more willing to be more unrealistic, to go for something
Yeah.
bigger. So Venus being right there exalted with the North Node speaks to that to me. And then, she's going to continue to be a big influence because that Mercury retrograde is going to start, and she, like you're showing here,
She
at the end of
crosses
February,
over.
and she'll be right there with Mercury stationing. Um, so,
I guess the
and that's going to lead into another little mini Pisces grouping that's coming in here.
and that's kind of the
Yeah.
theme is that they're all kind of moving in we're going to notice that through the first half of
Hmm.
not the first half, but first couple months of the year is there are these stellium themes going on.
Hmm.
As I'm looking at this, I'm like, because I love me some exalted Venus and Pisces,
Hmm.
but I am a little um I am a little concerned now that I think about it, especially it's this chart for the eclipse being set for Washington here. I'm just thinking about like commodities and stuff of like both Venus and Jupiter exalted. Like that sounds good, but when it comes to like prices of things and like
Hmm.
that it's I don't know. I don't know if that's gonna help if things like balloon in some way or things go higher in price, especially with some sort of destabilization of pricing or finances or I don't know what that looks like. I'm just throwing that out there because I was kind of thinking
Well,
about it.
yeah, when I was looking at the Capricorn ingress chart for DC, it definitely looked like economic concerns to me because it's like Aquarius rising and Saturn and Neptune are on the second house. On the
Mm,
Plastis chart, Saturn's like right on the cusp. And then when I was looking at the Aries ingress, it's like Jupiter and the exalted Jupiter is direct and in the second house, which I don't know if that's going to ultimately end up helping with whatever's going on with the economy after we hit that Aries equinox point. But it does make me wonder. I think you're right that there could be a lot of uncertainty around the economy continuing here. Like we're already seeing a lot of people talking about that right now. And I've seen people like S.J. Anderson and maybe some other astrologers talking. And there's some astrologer that's done research. I think it's with North Node in Aquarius. Like, the 2008 financial crisis was lined up with that, but
mm.
not just that.
Not just that.
The
No,
North
there's
Node
a
in
lot of
Aquarius,
stuff going on.
the North Node in Aquarius has a history beyond even the 2008 economic crisis of this economic uncertainty. And this is the first Aquarius eclipse. It's on that North Node side. So it is a time where
Yes.
there could be some rockiness with figuring all that kind of stuff out. And yeah, there might be attempts. The thing about all this, which I think we bring up, for example, trying to save the economy with a stable coin or something else, because we have such a wild, I think what's tricky, because I'm not an economist, so, and I don't have that academic training, so I am not an astrologer that ever likes to come out telling
To
people
be like, yeah, this is gonna,
what I
yeah.
think based on the, even though I know the astrology, and I'm also not a financial astrologer either. But what I can say about what I know about the astrology and how that would relate to the economy would be it's kind of hard to know because I mean there's so much about this astrology where like you would think like there's going to be attempts made to save it or combat it. That's going to be something we haven't probably necessarily seen before. It's going to take
Yeah.
some kind of new form however this shows up before, compared to how it's shown up before. So, what does like if there's like a bank crisis or a market crisis or something, like what does that look like now with the way things are changing with technology and potential digital currency and so forth? And yeah.
Well, and that's where Saturn Neptune can come in too, because this is the highlight period of that as well. So we talk about this creation and the new and on the
Hmm.
world point and world leaders and this fresh thing is, like if we're confronted
Yeah.
with something like that, it is there, everything speaks to the newness of solutions or ideas or that doesn't mean they're clear or they'll be the best per se, but it's this threshold of something new being introduced
Yeah.
that will destabilize the system in some way. Obviously, we see both with Uranus in Taurus squaring the eclipse, but also a fallen Saturn with Neptune. It's not business as usual. There's definitely new things coming in here. So,
Yeah. And it's going to be followed by whatever does happen there. We already talked about this, but that Mercury retrograde with Venus is going to follow it. So it's going to there's going to be some sort of Mercury retrograde, internal Piscean dreamscape alchemical process to go through subsequently to both that eclipse and the exact Saturn Neptune coming in with whatever does happen there. That's going to be part of the adjustment to it. And so it's kind of an interesting thing because sometimes Mercury retrogrades will make you think you're going in somewhere and then you kind of realize, oh, I'm not, or I got to go back, or I got to work around this, or I just got to have a little bit delay to work through this, whatever it is. And so there's an interesting combination there coming here. I will say about this Mercury retrograde in Pisces, I know people don't like Mercury retrograde in Pisces because it's Mercury's opposite sign and the fall of Mercury. It's essential dignity wise, just by sign, it's like the worst place for Mercury to be.
Oh, and
But
ruling the
that's
eclipse, ruling the Virgo eclipse.
and it's ruling the Virgo eclipse. But Jupiter is in Cancer, and yeah, Jupiter is retrograde. But during this retrograde, Jupiter will station direct in Cancer and pull out of the retrograde. And then about 10 days later or so, around a week or so, there's a little bit of a sequence where Jupiter stations direct and then Mercury stations direct. And so Mercury at least has a trine to an exalted Jupiter ruling Mercury in Pisces. So it's one of the better possibilities to have with a Mercury. The only thing that could be conceivably better would be Jupiter in Pisces, but I actually think Jupiter in Cancer is better in some ways because if Jupiter was there, it would mean Jupiter is also undergoing
In
a thing
Pisces,
with
yeah.
Pisces with the sun. Yeah, so there's something here that I think can really end up coming out of this. This is going to take us into
Our next
March and the
hotspot.
Ingress.
Yeah. So yeah, and it's interesting that our hotspot. We're not talking about the Aries ingress per se, but as Gray had mentioned, actually, I believe in our last year ahead, how you had noticed the pattern, obviously with Saturn and Neptune lining up at the beginning of a cardinal sign, is
Yeah.
that all our ingresses, basically all our cardinal ingresses, our seasonal ingresses, including the big one of Aries, is configured to the Saturn Neptune piece, and so
Especially Neptune.
especially Neptune. So
Yeah. So Neptune has this huge influence on every single part of the, I mean, that Neptune is not going away. Every single ingress chart, the sun is doing something with Neptune really closely. And this is like a conjunction, yeah, with Saturn Neptune. Yeah, it's really
yes,
powerful.
so we have this baked into the Aries the Aries ingress. For Washington, D.C., we have a Gemini rising chart. So we're looking at sort of a 6 month influence as far as like if you were to take, mutable rising, it's kind of like the 6 month. We'd look at the Libra ingress to see what's going on there. But we will know one thing will not change is that Neptune will be present. So, which is interesting with Mercury retrograde on the North Node ruling that ascendant for the US. Interesting for that. But I don't think we're gonna maybe talk about that so much here today since we're on the hotspot train. But it's actually so we're kind of fast forwarding over to, I believe, the Aries new moon. So we're kind of on I know. I honestly, Gray, 2026, it's all hot. It's all a hot spot. It's all
It's all
hot.
hot.
It's all hot.
I
But we're
mean, what's interesting about leading up to this, I would just say, just to skip over it, but just comment on it, is that because what's so interesting about that Saturn Neptune forming in February 20th, Saturn will start moving away from Neptune, but planets, we just saw Aries ingress, the sun comes through. Before that, Venus comes through. Like
yeah,
there's a whole parade of planets
going
that
over it.
keep going over it. And they're all going to be important and they're all going to keep reactivating this meaning of the new Saturn Neptune cycle. But the point where things get hot that I know we're going to focus on is when Mars comes into
Mars, here it
Aries
is.
because, of course, Saturn and Neptune, they're in the exaltation of the sun. And that is a really important piece of Neptune and Aries and Saturn and Neptune and Aries, the exaltation of the sun, which definitely goes to me with like the great creative capacity of it. It also goes to the threat of greater authoritarianism, which we're
Hmm.
clearly seeing, but also people really wanting to take back their own sovereignty, which could end up being a fight against that authoritarianism, but it's a domicile of Mars. And
Yes.
so Mars
April
coming in there
10th.
is really important. And of course, Mars Saturn conjunctions are always hugely important, especially in terms of like the troubles and difficulties of the world. And this is like a particularly intense one because it's Mars, Saturn, Neptune. And as you're showing here, the other thing about this hotspot is that it turns out by the time we get to the Mars Saturn, we've got Mercury there too. So it's Mercury, Neptune, Mars, Saturn, new moon in Aries with Chiron in Aries. But it's especially that Mars, Saturn with Mercury, Neptune all together that makes this looks like one of the perhaps difficult pressure points, pressure cooker, just difficult things going on in the world. Lots of movement and change, and it's going to really emphasize the need to just be really resilient and persistent and persevering and working through whatever it is you're facing here.
Yeah.
But it's this is a really intense period here. Really, the entire time Mars is in Aries, we're going to see this still going on, but especially in the build up to this Aries new moon because Mars is like applying to Saturn here.
And so, and just in case you're not able to see the chart, if you're listening on audio, it is April 10th, Mars moves into Aries, and then we're looking at the new moon on April 17th. So basically, there's this mid-April influence going on with just the hyper Martian Aries energy. And but then we have the side note of like, I mean, obviously it's going to be very focalized on Aries for many reasons. But then there's this kind of this side note story of Venus and domicile over there in Taurus, getting close to Uranus as
Uranus,
well.
yeah.
But
In this period in general, yeah, one of the thing we have to lean on is exalted Jupiter moving forward, direct, and Venus in her home sign of Taurus, and they're in a sextile. So that is going on, thankfully and fortunately, while this big heat up in Aries is going on. So there's going to be parts of your life where there's definitely some. It's going to be interesting because there's a way where there could be a couple different parts um, happening at once. Um, but Jupiter in Cancer is the one that's really key to it to me because um, Jupiter's aspecting Venus as well as all the Aries stuff.
yeah, right on my sun, right on pretty much on my sun at this point. But it makes me think of also why this is so key too. It's kind of like the sort of the eclipse understanding of, eclipses are definitely activated when Mars comes around to activate them, like activate the eclipse point. Which I guess is interesting if we think back to the Aquarius eclipse we were talking about earlier, because Mars is behind the sun, so it will activate it rather quickly. On side note, a
Hmm.
side note for that. But in this context, it makes me think about Mars just activating that, that Aries ingress chart that just
Mm.
happened, the Saturn Neptune configuration. There's just like in the, couple months leading up to that, there is it almost makes me think of like back in 2020, or even when we think about just the Jupiter Saturn conjunction at 0 degrees Aquarius, like the thing kept hitting it. It's almost like it's hitting
Hmm.
this invisible spot that has been supercharged with like planetary intention. And then Mars is like, okay, I'm here. Let's get things moving, or like now the action's here. So that's what I'm kind of picking up with this new moon is that uh it has like Mars is like, okay, well, what was this meeting at these degrees all about? Well, it's time to go. It's time to act. It's time to do something.
Yeah, and collectively there'll be difficult things probably erupting with this, but
Sextiling
I
Pluto.
think that's what, and we could probably expect there's technology stuff and maybe even some technological difficulties or breaks or conflicts or cyber things happening. We had some breakdowns recently with the retrograde. This could,
Mm.
this could be something with that too.
Oh, true.
But I think what you just said is the key thing for people personally is because you're already going to be having this Saturn Neptune meaning that you've been relating with for at this point 2 months. Um, and has already been set off by some other, the Sun and Venus coming through. But yeah, Mars coming into it, Mercury coming into it. There's definite like something really spurring and while at the one hand it could be overwhelming with lots of stuff to go take care of and pressure and I got to keep up with the pace and move through this, but yet there's some kind of because if Saturn's involved, sometimes that can bring an obstacle or a limit, and you kind of want to move forward, but you can't quite. You got to work
Yeah.
through something. So
Mm-hmm.
but for really shaping and forging something out of this, um, while it's not a pleasant, easygoing configuration, there could be something really powerful that comes out of this for people. Um, that's always the case with these configurations, even though it might just look really difficult, and sure it will be, but um, you can really something can really end up coming out of this. That's quite powerful, really.
Yeah, it feels like sort of like I'm thinking of like the Fool card a little bit, the Tower and the Fool coming together. It's like,
Mm,
you stand on the precipice to some extent, and like at some point you got to jump. At some point you got to take the leap or have the courage to do something, or like, or you're backed into a corner and you have to like fight for something, or like
hmm
take, or set out on a journey because like like there no more can proceed here. It kind of I'm like thinking about all these scenarios to where it's not like, oh yeah, let's just go do this. Like Saturn can create limitations and back you in or block things, or
Right.
or frustrate you to do something. Sometimes we're just so frustrated, it's like I can't take it anymore. Like I got to do something. And then there is this volatile aspect with it too, with having Mercury there, because Mercury is going to give a mouthpiece to whatever
hmm
planet it's connected to. And so seeing it, sandwiched between Mars and Saturn, it's like that's what's going to be vocalized. That's what's going to come to the surface. That's what's going to be the alchemical transitional kind of
hmm
figure is it's going to be speaking Mars. It's going to be speaking Saturn. So I mean, I definitely can see things getting heated in the world as far as like,
Yeah.
going back and forth, rashly or impulsively, with, them be fighting words, kind of things.
Yeah.
Yeah, it
And
could
that's one of the
definitely
key
come up.
things is that idea of fighting words and being aware of that.
Yeah.
And also, I get what it makes me think of too is when I was saying it is possible to really build something out of this, but it's not necessarily, even though it's Aries, because Saturn's involved, it's not necessarily going to be
Long
happening fast,
lasting
although probably
or,
about as fast as Saturn can get. I mean, Saturn
yeah.
Aries is about as fast as Saturn gets. So, but I do think there's something here about um, looking at it is going to bring up what's not working, bring up the difficulties, bring up the limitations, but working with that, something can really be built out of this, and there's going to be some kind of reckoning here about this Saturn Neptune configuration for us. Um, and I think in the world, this could be a time where a lot of collective the aspect of Saturn and Neptune that can go with paranoia and delusions and people being wrapped up in propaganda and illusions. And there's also a history of Saturn Neptune with like inquisitions and witch hunts and so forth. That whole kind of constellation of things could definitely be getting
Yeah.
riled up here, that in our personal lives we're just going to have to be really deliberate and mindful, and definitely not rushing off heedlessly on something, like being really strategic and thoughtful and mindful with what we're doing here. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Because there will be movement. There will be probably frustration and activation. And Saturn is a little bit challenged here. So, how do you not completely forego? Because sometimes we need a little Saturn in our lives to approach things, have a little calculation here, or, don't
Hmm.
fly off too much of the handle, have some sort of long term, even if we're starting, fresh towards something or heated up. So,
Yeah, and
because
it
at the end
occurs
of
to
the
me.
day, yeah,
Mm,
Mars is
yeah.
not an easy planet. It's purposeful, but it can be very destructive as well.
Yeah, it occurs to me we haven't really talked about Saturn being in fall in Aries in this episode so far, but that fall status of Saturn, one element of that to me is just the real rebellious nature of Saturn in Aries, and it can be more impulsive and headstrong and just wanting to go off on its own, and but that could be put to good use really in some ways, and compared to Pisces, Aries is way more able to have that fiery clarification to really target goals. So I think there can be, interestingly, some support for um, breaking out on your own thing, or not just counteracting something else going on that you don't like. But again, you just need to have a good plan, and yeah, not rush off here, even
I
though
f-
could be a lot of anger and frustration stirred up with it.
I feel like I'm kind of got the idea of like, as if we think of it past the moment itself and more as an inception point, it makes me think of how many startups could come to, be revving up right now, like starting to form, especially in the tech realm, or like innovations there with, Mercury, Mars, Saturn, Neptune, essentially in this sextile to Pluto over there in Aquarius.
Absolutely,
And
yeah,
sort of this idea of going off on your own or being the pioneer and, creating something that has never been created before, on the
absolutely, and
plus side, there could be that.
yeah, and like to your point about that, because one thing I was sort of referencing, everybody's talking about economic instability right now, and I was realizing I didn't actually specify some of those. And one of the most talked about things right now is this idea of like an AI bubble. And remember, we
Yes.
did experience that with the internet. We have a lot of cycles right now playing out or ending and starting that bring to mind the World Wide Web and the internet being created. And at the end of the 90s, we had that internet bubble that popped. But if something like that does happen with AI, the one thing I that is important to me about it is, I don't know where AI is. I'm not going to pretend I know where AI is going, and there definitely could be a bubble popping. And how fast AI advances in some ways people are imagining it right now, it may not happen. But Saturn Neptune cycles, although you'll hear people say, "Oh, it's about what's not real. It's about delusion. It's about being in an illusion." They every time real things happen. I mean, maybe all of our reality is an illusion, but real tangible things in the world take form that then define what's to
Yeah.
come
What is
in
reality?
subsequent
Yeah.
decades. And so something is taking form here, and that we for example, we did have a big dot-com bubble, an internet bubble, and then all in the early 2000s, all reconfigured, and these entities that are running the world right now essentially were born during that same time period. And so if there could be some of that AI bubble popping, but there's going to be all these startups forming, and people are going to be figuring out how to adjust to whatever that is. And we know there's all these technology. Yeah, so it's one of those things where there could be a lot of breakdowns happening and things are shifting, but things are also really forming, like you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
that are going to end up having a long-term impact. We just don't. We're in a process of like not knowing where everything's totally going yet, right? So it's got that Aries Fool, like the Fool quality in terms of Aries. Makes me think of what you were saying about that earlier too, because Aries is kind of like can be just like, well, just go for it.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna do it.
I'm just gonna do it. I'm just
Yeah.
gonna what I got to lose, you know. So, all right. Well, let us move on to potentially one of the hottest spots and the longest of spots.
Yeah.
We're gonna fast forward to the summer here.
Hmm.
But we're gonna stop off around June 29th
Yeah.
first.
Unfortunately, we skipped over one of the more positive periods of the whole
Oh yeah, okay.
year.
Well, let's give it an honorable mention.
We don't have
What's
to, but
what's
we're
the
talking about the
honorable
hotspots.
mention?
Well, there's just a period where, not like it's compared to the rest of the year, the whole period of Venus and Jupiter coming together. I'm just thinking like, we're going from the
Oh,
way we're
yeah,
jumping
yeah,
from a
yeah, yeah.
hotspot to hotspot, where,
That's hilarious.
we're missing some of the points where like there's
Okay, well,
something more,
let's
positive
earlier
to say.
June. Yes,
Earlier
I
June,
know.
yeah, we have Venus and Jupiter coming together, and that'll be something that's just kind of building up, and it's going to be after Uranus has obviously already gone into Gemini and so forth. I did notice this past year, for example, we had a Venus Jupiter conjunction in Cancer, and it coincided with a lot of difficult astrology aspects happening around the same time, especially right before it.
I
And
remember.
I feel like I saw it with many people that while there might have been pressures going on because of it was Mars and Libra opposite Saturn, Neptune, for example, as Venus was coming together with Jupiter, you saw that Venus Jupiter still showing up for people, and new growth and positive things coming in. And so, yeah, anyway, that's
Yeah,
something that is going to happen before Jupiter comes into to
to
Leo.
Leo.
And it's that place where, for those listening to this at the end of 2025, this is, of course, right around the place where Jupiter recently stationed retrograde
Mm-hmm.
and was part of this big grand water trine that we've been all going through right now. So this is a place where Jupiter is coming back to that place where Jupiter had just stationed earlier this year. And now Venus is there. Yeah, and Mercury. So this is all before Mercury goes retrograde in Cancer. So it's a place of the year where there's less of this pressure cooker thing going on that we're going to keep talking about in this
Yes,
episode.
yes.
So it's not like this whole year we're skipping over parts of the year where there's other things going on, and this part of early June is one of them.
This is a cool spot. This is a
Yeah,
cool spot that enjoy your Venus Jupiter together. Um, yeah, no. And it's nice. I mean, as a Cancer, I feel very honored to have Venus Jupiter in Cancer twice
yeah, twice.
in one go. Yeah, so
I guess
that's
part of the reason is
exciting.
a great combination is, Jupiter's exalted in Cancer. Venus is a triplicity water planet ruler, so she likes being in water. And so it's just a
Mm.
really nice combination of them in Cancer together, especially for like what really brings you comfort and pleasure and joy and, community and loved ones and just like feeling good in your body kind of thing, right? And imagination. And so hopefully this is a nice thing that we can still get out of the Jupiter and Cancer experience before we head into the fiery Leo part. And one of the things I was honestly one of the big things for me for preparing for this with you, I hadn't taken the time to get into looking back at Jupiter and Leo so much. And I was actually amazed. Now, Jupiter and Leo historically does go with great conflicts and things, a lot of the stuff we're already talking about, but there is incredible creativity and really groundbreaking creativity that I was seeing showing up with it, and including protests, including people asserting human rights, civil rights. The last time, I remember in 2015, which actually was when we had Venus and Jupiter coming together in Leo, was when the Supreme Court, for example, legalize gay marriage. Um, but there is all sorts of creative innovations that come through with Jupiter and Leo, as well as, like I'm saying, like protests and focusing in on greater civil rights and so forth. So what I think is so interesting about that, I was thinking about one of the things is when we're talking about triplicity, Jupiter does have the triplicity fire rulership, so it is one of the rulers of fire signs. So Jupiter has great material and sort of alliance, community support for things in fire signs like Leo. But I was also thinking maybe it's because it always follows the Jupiter in Cancer period. And then maybe also it's because in the sidereal zodiac, Jupiter's still exalted. So
Oh,
like
that.
some people, maybe like you, my partner, she has
Yeah, we
Jupiter
both
in
have
Leo and
Jupiter and
tropical,
Leo.
but it's actually exalted in the sidereal
Hmm.
zodiac. So when we're overlaying the zodiacs, there is that element of, you know, sure we're losing the tropical exaltation, but in the first stretch of for a while in Leo, Jupiter's still exalted in the sidereal. But for whatever reason, Jupiter in Leo, lots of big creative innovation. For example, in that late 70s period, we have, it's not like that's when hip hop was born and when like punk music was born, but they were really taking form and emerging, as one great artistic movement. And in the past, there's other things like surrealism and Dadaism, and in the 60s, like some of that great like late 60s psychedelic,
Psychedelic, yeah.
rock and so forth. Yeah, so there's and in literature as well, all sorts of things like I was seeing interestingly, even for the times we're coming in, like real forward thinking things like Aldous Huxley's like Brave New World and the first H.G. Wells science fiction novels like The Time Machine, Nietzsche with like Thus Spoke Zarathustra, which really had a huge paradigm influence in the world. These are all Jupiter and Leo things. And what's what's interesting about this is historically, Jupiter and Leo appears to me to be an especially kind of under the radar, groundbreaking Jupiter placement. Now, it does definitely go with big conflicts in the world too, because it's Jupiter coming into a big fiery sign, right? But once Jupiter comes into Leo at the end of June, the thing that's especially powerful about it is it's just like lighting up this entire configuration, which you're referring to as the cradle
Or the cauldron. I like the
or the
cauldron.
cauldron.
I
Yeah,
like the cauldron. Just imagine
yeah,
this witch stirring over her brew, her
yeah.
cosmic brew of the collective, and what is stirring in the cauldron. And it reaches the the just the right heat with Jupiter in Leo, right? The cauldron
Mm,
is lit, the fire is high. And now we're cooking with gas, basically, is
totally.
with
Yeah.
yeah.
I really like the cauldron, thinking about especially the Saturn, Neptune, and Pisces part. But yeah, I kind of feel like this is like we're really kind of, you could also think about really shaping and forging a cauldron to really hold your witch's
Mm.
brew, like you're saying, like what you're going to be cooking out of this time period. The cradle is really interesting because I came across in a used bookstore this book, Aspect Pattern Astrology by the Hubers. There's like Bruno and Louise
Oh, I
Huber
have
and
that
Michael.
book.
Oh, do you have it? Okay,
Uh-huh.
cool. So, yeah, so they call it the cradle. And I actually didn't buy the book, but I just looked at the section on it because I wanted to see what they were saying. And like you're referring to it as a cradle, they call it the cradle. I don't know if they're the ones that came up with the term cradle or not. One of the key parts about the cradle is we've got these trines, we've got these sextiles, we've got all this synergy, but then there is this oppositional aspect, really energy,
Mm-hmm.
really charging it up. And that's the piece of the Jupiter opposite Pluto that you already referred to. The last time we had this in Leo Aquarius was when the Bill of Rights was proposed, and the Department of War and Department of Treasury and the Supreme Court convenes, and all this foundational stuff. The United States government is formed. One of the things that the Hebers talk about a lot in that book is the incredible stability from the symmetry, and they describe it as like this invisible wall of protection from things that are unpleasant or being attacked or being criticized. But while cradles, we can think about cradles being connected to babies, which we could think about like life, death, and transitioning from one dimension to another. Like people that are born, so they're talking about it being born like natally, like because it's such a powerful symmetrical gift or thing in the chart. People can want to stay within the cradle and like stay within this stable environment, and they have this, they need to learn this lesson of leaving it. And I think collect that's obviously different than a collective transit, but it speaks to how the incredible synergy of this and how much can really take form. And it makes me think too that you might be swept up in something, to be careful about that. Also, in a Saturn Neptune way, because of great uncertainty and all the change, we might want to hold ourselves back and just stay too much in the comfort zone, stay too much in a place of security where we kind of miss the boat, so to speak. Um, I was thinking about how the Hebrews, the way they describe the natal part, being something to think about. But it's overall like a really, there's so much harmony, that it's a configuration that can really help with like adjusting to change. I think because it's sort of like when you have a grand trine in your chart, somebody can be just like stuck in that and just like my friend Jason Hawley, I know, likes to talk about people with grand trines just like kind of running that, and they're just like staying in this trine and not, you can just stay in that pattern because
You
it's
never
just going
push
to
out of
work.
it. Yeah, it just
And
works. Yeah.
and that's what this is like, a really powerful configuration, which is why we kind of know something's coming through here, and you yourself want to be as much as you can positioning yourself to really have your own kind of big breakthroughs and bringing things into form during this time period, because we've got Jupiter opposite Pluto, but Jupiter is trine Neptune. Jupiter is sextile Uranus. Uranus is trine Pluto. Uranus is sextile Neptune. Like it's so much synergy here.
Yeah. I don't know why my aspect lines aren't lighting it up. It was probably a setting. Um, but it's interesting, like all of what you're saying with Jupiter in Leo. So this is like a defining moment at the end of June when it makes this switch. But sort of the cooking or the destabilization qualities first. Like I don't think if we were in the nestled in our cradle, so to speak, there is definitely this time period feels like there is a bit of a jolt out of the
Yeah,
cradle because all of a sudden Jupiter is in Leo now, which is very activating versus the comfort of Jupiter exalted in Cancer. And then we have Mars, basically on the Independence Day, making a conjunction to Uranus in
yeah,
Gemini. So so what goes along with this ingress definitely has a bit of a jolty, oh, what was that? Kind of thing. Like energy is shifting, a little erratic, but also maybe exciting, and sort of that creative point that you had made earlier. Like I feel like the shift will be palpable, especially in the intellectual department, the inspirational department. Like, something's cracking
absolutely.
open.
Yeah, and that that Mars Uranus conjunction is a really big deal. I know for time you'll be able to, people watching us, there'll be people doing entire podcasts about the history of this episodes. It's a huge deal. It's something that's in the United States chart to some degree. It's not an exact conjunction, but they're both in Gemini. The atomic bombs were dropped in World War II as they were coming together in Gemini last time. this is one of the things about this year why so many people are worried about conflicts exploding during this time period because of Mars and Uranus coming in Gemini, and it's pretty wild. It's happening right around the July 4th time period. But
Oh,
it's also just really active. It's activating right as we're at the very beginning of this cradle formation, though. It's also just really kicking it up and activating it. Um, and so it really creates a big dramatic opening of all these planets coming together during the rest of July. I would hope on personal levels, again, we can use that Promethean quality of like liberation and breakthroughs and innovations and experimenting and really breaking through to new ground. And maybe you're also showing that Mercury's about to
well,
go. This is
yes,
when Mercury
that's
goes
yeah,
retrograde too. Exactly. Yeah. So this.
ruling that Mars Uranus. So there is a
Yeah.
little squirrely, like my
Yeah.
worry is, things, wires getting crossed, and then there's sort of these
Absolutely.
extreme reactions to it.
Yeah. Definitely. So this is when we were talking before. I know we're not going to really focus so much on Mercury retrograde here, but this is another time where we have this really powerful alignment configuration coming in, and then Mercury goes retrograde in a water sign at the same time. So while this whole other thing is going on, Mercury's taking us through another one of these inner water journeys. That's going to be part of how we are adjusting to all this big change.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Mercury just keeps showing up at the most interesting times of to which, when I think about like the Mercury retrograde periods also it's such a contrast to the fire air in the sense of, Mercury being retrograding through mute signs. So there's this
Mm,
like internal, not spoken quality, or maybe it's spoken. It's not spoken outright. So so seeing something that's so out there in with Mars and Uranus coming together in Gemini, but there's a retrograde mute planet that is
mm,
ruling it. So I almost wonder if it is as loud, I mean maybe, or if there's like some sort of like internalized or behind the scenes process
mm.
or backdoor something going on.
Yeah.
Because,
Well, if there's any way to cool off that Mars Uranus, that would be great. I'm hopeful for that. Something else as you're talking about some of that, I didn't mention this before, but one thing I thought was really interesting about Jupiter and Leo, this is a little bit of a sidetrack, but it ends up connecting. Is I noticed that it's not when like motion pictures were like invented, but what's I was looking for the history of motion pictures. One of the I see on the internet. I don't know if it's absolutely true, but one of the first and it might have been the first big public screening of the Lumiere films of motion pictures was a Jupiter and Leo period, and obviously Jupiter and Leo just makes symbolic sense for
Yeah.
motion pictures and which became, ultimately like the Hollywood era in the United States. And that's been something where in 2025, we're really seeing not that it's all dying, but from those devastating fires in Los Angeles to the way things are changing, where the technology's going. And I think there's something interesting when I think about it, the first public showings of motion pictures coming in with Jupiter and Leo, and Jupiter Leo being part of this. However, storytelling is going to be changing with all this technology. One of the elements of Saturn and Neptune is, of course, the fact that even as we're talking now, the AI videos have already gotten like really, really
Yes.
good at making it difficult to tell what's real or not real. We can only imagine by this point it's even further along. I think that's going to be one of the interesting that could be an interesting creative element of the big change coming in here also. And it also could even be with like the Mercury retrograde. There's like things people are still working out with it during this time about how exactly some of that is working. Um,
Mm.
but I would be curious if stuff like that shows up with this configuration too, if we
I mean,
start
I
seeing a
could
little bit more.
definitely see that, especially as you know, if you're looking at the chart, you can see the nodes just inching towards the threshold to turn, you know, for the south node to go in Leo, north node to go in Aquarius.
Hmm.
And I mean, really what you're speaking to is, you know, sort of that fall of like, you know, influence or Hollywood or who, you know,
Hmm.
this performative quality. And I feel like the South Node run through there will bring up all those kind of things that you're talking about, because that will be definitely shifting and changing. In maybe I know in the episode that I did with Tasha Begg, where we looked at Saturn and Aries and this conjunction and having to do with popular culture and
Mm.
sort of the shift of, you know, these Hollywood influencer figures, and it going, you know, extending more out to, you know, all the creators out there, you know, with the phones in their hands and these
Yeah.
influence of the public. And you know, more so than looking at, you know, an Angelina Jolie or a Brad Pitt figure. You know, does anybody even care about, you know, that type of thing
Yeah, no,
anymore?
that's
But
definitely changed. And like the 53, 54 Saturn Neptune is really like the television era coming in. And then the 89 one was like the kind of dawning of the internet. But now with like, I always think about that as moving from like the screens into this past cycle has like, yeah, like the phone screen, like you're talking about. It also makes me wonder about music because I was just refreshing my notes about the Jupiter and Leo. Like I mentioned, the 60s, like psychedelic rock, it was like 66 to 68, basically, that Jupiter was in Leo. But if you go back to the one before that, it was 55 to 56, which really was when Elvis Presley got huge. And rock and roll like really came in. And then we get into the next cycle, we're in like the mid 60s with like everything with like the full on psychedelic rock
hmm
revolution is full on. At that point, we get to the next one and we get punk rock
it's always over the
coming in.
top of the next thing. It's
And
like
then we get to
always, yeah.
yeah, and the next one is 9091, which is basically like right up into like Nirvana, Nevermind, that whole music bursting through. So like there was a few of them in a row there where it was just like each time we were getting another something showing up. Maybe even with music and just people's creativity. I mean, I think there's all sorts of ways to think about some interesting things coming through with this.
Yeah. So let's pull back to our hotspot for time's sake. We
Yeah,
are, you know, basically is that bit of like June 29th, those ingresses. It pretty much ushers us into a time that will be, you know, all of July and August, even a little early September there. And so this is when the cradle is forming,
hmm,
as Gray said. It's basically July 15th through July 24th, all these outer planets are coming into exact. It's not just
exact.
forming, it's
Yeah.
exact. It is a very, the fact that it's all happening at the same time is the siren's going by. I always make jokes that when the siren goes by, that's when, you know, the universe is like, pay attention to this. You know, I saw someone, a friend of mine, the other day, who's not an astrologer or keep up with anything like that. And she's like, what does this mean? Why are they saying this? And it was just some, you know, tweet or whatever that said, uh, you know, February will be the big change and July will change your life forever. It was
Uh-huh.
just so dramatic. And I was just laughing and I'm like, well, this is what they're speaking of. But
Yeah.
it is, this is that cradle cauldron coming together at just the right time with Jupiter opposing Pluto, right smack dab in the middle on July 20th, is
Mm.
that exact opposition. But what we're really looking for of the hottest hots, the hottest of the
Yeah.
hots,
And it
is
is
July
mm.
29th.
Yeah, yeah. Which is right after, like you were saying, it's like, I don't know, like July 15th to the 25th basically encompasses all those.
The
I mean, they're all
perfection.
exact, which is crazy just within 10 days.
Well, and the nodal shift also happens July 26th.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah, so let's extend that out. So July 15th through July 26th these exact configurations are coming together, and the shift of the nodes as well. And it culminates into this July 29th full moon in
Hmm.
Aquarius, which will be coincide with the Sun Jupiter conjunction. So,
Hmm.
Jupiter is going into the heart of the sun there. Pluto is being lit up. Obviously, we're lighting up the cradle cauldron because it's part of that
Yeah.
configuration. And really, there's also an introduction at this time to the eclipses that are coming because we will have the solar eclipse on what is that, August 12th, I believe. That will be near Jupiter. Where did I put that? August 12th. And then we have August 27th is our last lunar eclipse in Pisces, which will square Uranus. So really, through August, this is high octane lunation material. So Gray, is there uh, anything about this particular moment in time that you would like to share or observe?
Yeah, I mean it's the same
Ooh,
thing that
Venus
we've already
squaring
been.
Mars. Sorry. Just
Yeah, yeah.
throwing
What's
that
it?
out there too.
Yeah, no, that's the other thing. So, when all those exact aspects are happening, I think we'll probably be seeing shifts and things happening, and that's again like especially in that second half of July. But one thing about Jupiter is that Jupiter is like at the very, very end of its cycle. And what's interesting about this full moon is it's happening right at the same time Jupiter's being like reanimated. It's Jupiter's in the heart of the sun right here. It's like it's a exact conjunction of Jupiter and the sun. So Jupiter is reanimated as this full moon lights the whole thing up. So I do really wonder if it's going to be especially here at this end of July that things really show up in big more of the revelatory ways and much more obvious ways, and big realizations come through as a result. And the other thing, like you were saying at the same time, is Venus is in Virgo, forming a square to Mars. So this is the first waxing square aspect, big hard aspect of their cycle since that conjunction at the beginning of the year that we started off talking about. So the Venus Mars cycle also comes into a critical phase right here. So the other thing is that the nodes have now switched. We already had that Aquarius eclipse. Now the North node is in the same sign as Pluto, which is going to be something that just goes on for a while. And now the South node is in the same sign as Jupiter and Leo, which is going to go on for a while. Both of those things in and of themselves are important. And again, really goes with Pluto with the North node, Jupiter with the South node is just amping up the potential for the big breakdowns, volatility, and but big change, like new things coming together, new orders and forms. And so we get a really dramatic opening to the nodes switching with this full moon. It's just not a
Yeah.
lunar eclipse because the moon's too far from the node here.
Yeah. To me, this speaks, yeah, we're definitely news cycles lit up, people in power doing things that, almost could, in my mind, feel maybe like audacious, or if they already did, maybe there's some public backlash to this. I'm thinking about
Hmm.
Venus and Mars squaring, and maybe there is some unrest or protest or something along those lines, because I'm noticing significant here is I know we don't have the US chart overlaid, but I think if I threw it on here real quick, we got a Mars return for the US, and then we got this full moon on the nodal axis on the south node of the US. So
Wow.
I feel like as far as we got Venus on Neptune, the US is Neptune. Yeah, and Uranus getting close to, and I'm not trying to say like, oh, it's gonna be this thing, but I feel like if there is a moment for something pretty monumental to, come to light or be unleashed or pushed back from the people or what have you, it feels like this is this is the time in my mind. But Yeah, it's definitely the idea of like the people and the collective and the community and then the like who's in charge or who holds the power? Like how is this power being used? And if there's, injustice there. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, it's a lot. It's a big it's one of those things where it's so like to me this configuration looks so massive that I can't even like predict what it is because I know it's important. But
Yeah, and it's the kind of thing where there could be all sorts of, whether it's new revelations or just things form. So, like for example, something we haven't talked about that's a big thing in the news right now is the Epstein files, and
mm,
those supposedly maybe getting released, but we don't totally know what all is going to actually be released or
well,
what's going to be revealed for sure. But it's caused all sorts of, it really did cause President Trump to lose some significant influence and to start having people that were real loyal followers already starting to question and losing status. And this is the kind of thing we do see with Saturn, Neptune. Like people stop believing in something. Epstein himself he's interestingly born at the Saturn Neptune conjunction in Libra in the early
mm,
50s. And he has a really close Venus Mars conjunction in his chart, which I meant to bring him up actually at the earlier part of the year because I was thinking about his chart and just like being connected to that Venus Mars thing we started off by talking about. I don't know if that's when something will come out or if even if anything even does, but almost like it makes me wonder like the way people start changing or shifting with their inner stories and beliefs, that full moon in Aquarius could really kind of ignite something where it leads to greater movement or action or people, things shifting. And it's one of the wild card elements of this year where it's hard for me to,
yeah.
sometimes with Saturn, Neptune, things change. Like no one would have believed that the Berlin Wall was going to come down
Yeah.
in the time period leading up to it, or that the Soviet Union would have completely collapsed.
Yeah. It
Um,
it's has that. Mm.
so it has that quality to it. So it's also full moon squaring Chiron and Taurus, which we don't need to go into a great deal, but Chiron and Taurus, Chiron was discovered with Chiron and Taurus, so Chiron's only in Taurus for a little bit. But the only thing I really have to say about Chiron and Taurus in this brief experience we get that does line up with this is I was noticing, um, I was thinking about it in terms of Taurus being a Venus sign and with things like the arts and media and new forms like Chiron and Taurus seems to have gone with some wounding to Taurus in terms of like resources and monetary system and economics in the past. But at the same time, interesting new creative forms like show up as part of that. And it's going to be an ingredient in the astrological mixture. It's going to get stronger in the years ahead. We're only getting a little bit of it here, but this full moon piece seems like maybe one of the parts where we might get a little bit more of the Chiron and Taurus coming in on top
Yeah.
of it all at the same
Well,
time. So,
it, one thing's worth pointing out, just because you brought up Chiron and Taurus, is that around the ingress of Jupiter, so basically Jupiter makes a square to Chiron and Taurus when
mm,
it gets in there, and we're currently in this fall period, we're experiencing Jupiter squaring Chiron. So this has been an elongated transit that's been going on for a little while now, but this is going to be the final square, much like when Jupiter was squaring Saturn and how the final one was in cardinal sign. So there is this like shift in elements. So if you want to track, Jupiter and Chiron in your own story, or if you have it natally like me, if you're born during the period like 79, we had Jupiter. I was born with Chiron in Taurus, with Jupiter and Leo squaring it. So that might be
yeah,
significant
that's
there.
a great point that people in your time period are really going to be um there's something really important coming out with that for you. As well as
Yeah.
like getting the first experience of your Chiron return. That's another big thing for people with Chiron and Taurus. Just that starting up, but especially the Jupiter and Leo, Chiron and Taurus people.
Yeah. So we'll see. It'll be coming, but no, I really do resonate with what you were saying about something like the Epstein files or something, think about Pluto at this time. Like, Pluto can reveal secrets, things that were underground, things that are unsavory that, people didn't know about. The South Node at this point is on Trump's ascendant, so I'm sure that's not doing him any favors. So
Yeah, and
we'll
even
see how
if,
that
and
goes.
I guess also, I mean, even if things aren't, nothing really does come out explicitly, or people talking about the UAP disclosures, like nothing ever really does. People's minds are changing, people's beliefs are changing, and like that almost like it makes me just wonder, like, and nothing coming out would even amplify that, I think. um, and something really starting to get catalyzed out of the way people's beliefs about reality and the way things work and who they believe in. Um, because if we don't believe in something, there is that power of like belief that's going to be really important, and that's going to be a key ingredient in some of the big sudden changes that could end up happening.
Which makes sense also during that time period with the Sun and Jupiter meeting. And so like, Jupiter, even though it is kind of far away, it's still getting, rebirthed in its outer planet way in the Sun. So
Yeah,
some of the things that you're bringing up can make sense there. And especially as we go forward,
yeah.
we are going into eclipse season. So basically we're still in this elongated couple month hotspot. August 12th, we have a 20-degree Leo solar eclipse, South Node solar eclipse. Jupiter is just out of combustion, but still in range of beams over there. And then that basically so more emphasis, I'm assuming myself, on like, leadership and, people in power, people in charge, the new stories opening up in that realm, but also this creativity and performative quality we've been talking about. Um, and then also August 28th, this Pisces configured to your chart. You'll have fun on that one. Pisces lunar eclipse on August 28th, squaring Uranus. So there is, yeah, this whole period leading up to this culmination of something that is also potentially, Pisces, we think about, something maybe washing away or letting go, or the final sort of like release of like the transitional mutable nodal story, and then Uranus cracking that open too. Like it feels like something really shifts and comes to light at this time of the old story to introduce this new fixed quality that is being introduced or worked through.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a really, this lunar eclipse in Pisces on August 20th is really powerful. Mercury's with the sun. They're all squaring Uranus. Um, if you go back to that other one though, was it the 12th, August 12th, the
Yeah,
Leo
the
one?
12th.
Just to stay on that for a moment, like that one, like we'd mentioned, the Pisces lunar eclipse on the 28th will be not necessarily like a total continuation of what's already been happening, because I think so much is going to be changing. Um, it might be some of the same storylines you've already been experiencing with the Pisces Virgo eclipses, but it could still be some other variation based on all these changes. It comes after the first Leo eclipse. So this is another important thing. It's just like we got that first Aquarius eclipse. This is the first Leo eclipse.
Yeah.
So it's another element of like this new eclipse story coming up. And then maybe like you're saying too, then there's like a resolution of like an older story as we get to the Pisces one. But this one, yeah, you're mentioning Trump's ascendant. I mean, Leo solar eclipse with a south node doesn't really look, is not going to normally be good for the person in charge, the leaders. Um, this is a whole period in general where, it follows that full moon in Aquarius we were just talking about. I definitely wonder about leaders, people being empowered to rise up and change things, and no longer believe in the way things, the people they used to believe in, all sorts of things like that. And one thing we haven't talked about related to Saturn Neptune that this makes me think about a little bit with Jupiter now in Leo too, um, is that so this particular administration isn't necessarily the best around some issues with like women's rights and things like that, right? And for example, with like the whole movement around reproductive choice and so forth. And there is a pretty impressive track record with Saturn and Neptune um, with women's rights, like organizing for the first Seneca Falls Convention during a conjunction. Um, that continuing as you keep going through them into the 1917 one had these they're called like the silent sentinels. There were these women that went through hunger strikes and drew a lot of attention that really was instrumental in getting the right to vote. So not just women's rights, but all sorts of other civil rights and movements. I'm curious about, and with Jupiter and Leo, with this eclipse too, as part of it, it's also in a general trine to the Saturn and Neptune. That's one thing that I'm pretty curious about. That this is kind of part. This is basically, it's not the exact cauldron thing we were talking about, but it's a continuation. And what's interesting on this chart, people can see that Venus in Libra is in there,
Yeah.
creating another one.
Yeah.
And so
Oh,
and
that's
Venus
funny.
and Venus in Libra, would be another sign of this emphasis on women's rights, but equal rights, equity, um, issues around trans people, um, queer people. I think there's lots of stuff that could be coming through with this, and it all leads then into that
I think we're
Pisces lunar eclipse squaring Uranus, which
uh-huh.
would even more amplify. So it's a whole period where I really am curious if we really actually see something starting to build and erupt. And what's interesting about this one is Pluto. This is lining up with Pluto having gone out of bounds. So there's always like these small windows each year when Pluto is extremely out of bounds in southern declination. We've talked about this before on previous episodes, and my first teacher, Rosie Finn, wrote a whole book on it. I did an interview with her on my YouTube channel that people can watch if they're interested. But Pluto out of bounds on southern declination in Aquarius is sort of the game changer element, which is not the same as some of these other historical patterns people cite, like World War II and the Civil War. Pluto wasn't out of bounds in southern declination, and there are many examples of people rising up and people taking power back and important reforms coming in with Pluto out of bounds in southern declination. And we are basically coming into that with this. So, and it basically goes until like the beginning of December. It's just a short little window.
Mm,
And
but
that's
an important
another
one.
just big element underneath all of this. And so I was looking at this last time. We did see some revolutions going on in the world. There was resistance to things. I could see it going on and things happening. But it was also this first one we had this past year was pretty short. And I'm much more curious about it, what happens with this one, with Jupiter being opposite it and Pluto being part of this cauldron configuration like we're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's August 21st to December 1st is the
Mm,
time period that Pluto is out of bounds
out
in
of
southern
bounds.
declination. So this lunar eclipse is like a big opening announcement of that. Um, yeah.
Well, I feel like this can usher us into our final
Yeah,
hotspot
jump to the next hot
here,
spot. Yeah.
because it kind of goes in with what you're speaking, and especially
Yeah.
when you're also speaking about like women's rights
Women's
and
rights, yeah.
such. Because we do, as we mentioned earlier in the program, we have Venus going retrograde. Let's just see her date here. October 3rd is when she goes retrograde at 8 degrees of Scorpio. And she will do so at the time. So basically, she will be doing so in a square to Mars. She'll be near Mercury as well, and Mercury will be squaring Mars actually when she stations there. But some of the hot spot I was looking at in particular was the new moon that just comes 7 days later, the new moon in Libra, when she is in pretty much an exact square to Mars, and that will be ruling that new moon. Um, and yeah, so we're in our own underworld journey here. So basically, Pluto is doing its out of bounds thing. Venus is going into underworld journey and her detriment sign to be, come back out on the other side in domicile. Do you remember where the conjunction is, Gray?
With
With
the conjunction
Venus.
of Venus and the Sun, or
Yeah, Venus. Is it in
it's in
Libra or
like
is
the
it's
first
in
degree of Scorpio.
Scorpio?
That's
Okay.
a really
hmm
big that's a big
October 24th.
that's a big element of this.
Yeah, squaring Pluto. Yeah, so here's squaring our out of bound Pluto, basically.
Yeah.
So
So yes. So the thing that's really good, that connection you just made, is Venus retrograde periods often go with civil unrest and people taking action and changing things and things breaking down. And um, Pluto out of bounds is being really activated by this because, as part of it, Mars comes into Leo and is opposing Pluto, and they're squaring Venus. So it's definitely really lit up by this Venus retrograde, the Pluto out of bounds piece. What's really important about this is the final Venus star point in Scorpio.
Scorpio.
I was
Mm-hmm.
just looking for my notes where I wrote this down, but I think the first one was in 1926 to my memory, and my memory is telling me, I'm hoping that is correct, and that 1926 conjunction was a superior conjunction, I believe. So I mean, I think 1930 would have been the first retrograde one, maybe. But essentially, you can think about, I mean, 1926, that's a long
100
time ago.
years.
100 years, yeah. So they Venus will go through these long cycles of forming conjunctions with the sun in the same sign, and it's actually a really fascinating historical pattern that you can look at. It's a way that a planet like Venus can speak to much larger historical patterns of change that we often associate with like these outer planetary alignments that we're talking about. In 2022, around this time, we had the first Libra star point. That was when Venus was moving direct really fast on the other side of the sun from us. That was at the very end of Libra. And that was the beginning of the Venus Libra star point coming in. But it wasn't a total entrance into it because we always had this last one. So this is the final
Mm,
Scorpio one. And the next time Venus goes retrograde in this at the star point, the it'll begin in Scorpio again, but when Venus forms her reanimating conjunction with the sun, it will be in Libra. So we're not totally into the new Libra era yet. And there's something about the Scorpio era
the
we
send
are
off.
sending off here.
Yeah.
It does go back into Libra. So again, that to me speaks to, again, I think a lot of movements for all sorts of groups and that are facing um, oppression or inequity, and also just in your own personal life, addressing inequities, addressing what's out of balance. Um, I think the end of this Venus retrograde can be really helpful for bringing your needs and relationships and your desires into greater balance. You know, as she comes back, as you're showing here, by early November, Venus is retrograde, forming a sextile with Jupiter in Leo. But the beginning of the Venus retrograde is very dramatic in early October
Yeah.
because Venus is stationing in Scorpio, Mars is in Leo, applying to the square with Venus. Like we're mentioning, Pluto's also in the mix.
Hmm.
Um,
With Mars had just opposed Pluto as well, so they're
yeah,
that's actually in early October. So it's
in
basically the
early
second we get
October.
into October, and we do have to mention too, Mars moving into Leo will start to foreshadow what will eventually be a Mars retrograde in Virgo and Leo in 2027, early 2027. So there is a lot of foreshadowing that's happening during this period as well.
Yeah.
So
So when we talk about these retrogrades and how we often begin with this big breakdown and conflict and separation of something and questioning what do we desire, questioning what we want, going into the underworld, it is incredibly amplified because not only is it Scorpio, like you're
oh
showing
my
here, not only is
goodness. She stations when Mars, her ruler Mars, is opposite Pluto, exactly,
yeah,
and squaring Mercury. I
yeah.
mean,
So
that's powerful.
it's really powerful. And again, it's not just Pluto. It's an out of bounds Pluto. It's
Yes.
it's an extreme wild Pluto.
Wow.
And Mars and Mercury are creating this. Yeah, Mars is opposite of Pluto, squaring it. Venus is going to come back and square them both. So yeah, it's one where like you know it might be pretty difficult in different ways. There might be all sorts of frustrations, things that you want to change, things not things looking difficult, and it's one where the beginning of this could be a lot more frustrating and difficult, and really digging up all sorts of deep material in relationships or what you want to create, what you desire. And then we just go through this really deep, transformative Venus retrograde process that ultimately ends up in Libra in her own sign, making harmonious aspects to Jupiter and
Yeah.
Mars, where that can hopefully really help put you in touch with a with something out of this process that can really lead to some real productive changes or rebalancing, whatever it
Yeah.
is.
Well, so if you're like me and you're going to be in a Venus time lord, if Venus is going to be your time lord
Hmm.
in 2026, this is definitely a period to watch for. And it's so perfectly timed, Gray, too, when you think about just the way the lunations line up, because this is a time when we have back-to-back Venus ruled lunations, it's
Hmm.
the Libra new moon that enters us in. That's a bit crunchy. And then we have that Taurus full moon squaring Pluto at that time, too. So, we're just getting these Pluto activations and Venus right there. But now she's in domicile, but she's not out of, she's still combust and everything. So
And
it's a journey
she's in domicile, but remember, this is Venus shifting from being the evening star,
to the
which
morning.
is more of the sort of like poetic and well, the big contrast is that the morning star is way more assertive,
Yes.
direct,
She's spicier.
fight. Yeah, it's more the Venus of war type of quality. So there is that quality coming in also with Venus moving back into Libra here. And the thing that though I'm hopeful about this on personal level is the thing that I'm when I was looking at this astrology that gave me the most one of the things that made me more concerned about this year, even though certainly there could be global conflicts being sparked, but I actually got really a little concerned about this whole stretch of time because of, wow, there is a sextile with Jupiter. We start getting this Mars and Jupiter combination happening with the south node of the moon and with Venus, retrograde becoming this morning star in Libra and the way that's combining with that. I think this is going to be an area where we're going to have to watch for hopefully it's a time period. I'm going to say my hope is that it's a time period that leads to resolution of conflicts and greater peace in the world. But I am a little concerned about propaganda and with a third decan of Leo coming together there with Mars and Jupiter and one of the nodes and that kind of warping and distortion that could be possible there. And that's a decan. Austin Coppock in 36 Faces calls this like the face of like the banner, I think is what he
The
calls it,
banner, yes.
or like a flag, like a image that can really kind of rouse people to fight for something. And it's because we end up having this extended thing with Jupiter and Mars and the South
Yes.
Node that extended to 2027 because of Mars going retrograde in 2027. We're kind of jumping ahead here, but there's a way that I think we're just going to need to be careful about what comes out. I don't know what to say about it. I think what happens there is not necessarily the full story of it, but it might be there might be some different themes starting to pick up here that end up becoming more and more important as we go into the Mars retrograde that comes in 2027. Because what's also happening is Mars has moved past the place as Venus is stationing direct. Mars has crossed over the place where Mars will come back to later in 2027 when retrograde.
Yes.
So I'm hoping I'm not confusing people too much by this, but it's just there's a big turning point that happens here. It's a pressure cooker hotspot of the year with our own personal lives during this point, but there's a big turning point here with like October, November going into December that ends up being connected to what happens in 2027 with the Mars retrograde that will happen. That there'll be a lot of things to watch for with the storylines that are developing and what's happening. And I would just advise following the thing we were talking about earlier, following your own moral compass and staying in your integrity and really using this Venus retrograde for some real, I think it can be one that's a very transformative Venus retrograde that while it might be difficult, especially at the beginning, it really ends up hopefully helping you find this sort of purified, essentialized Venus expression that you can be more assertive with in the world. But
Yeah.
that Jupiter Mars can be used really positively. It doesn't have to be a negative war machine propaganda thing. And it can be something that's really used in combination with Venus in really courageous, strident ways of like, on behalf of the true good and beautiful and good ways of idealism and inspiration.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, honestly, life is, as we talked about in the beginning, there's multivalent themes that are always
Hmm.
around and both can exist at the same time. And so just being very aware of that, because I can see all those scenarios being a possibility. What I do like about Venus coming out in her domicile and, working with this Mars, Jupiter, South Node combination is that she'd started with extreme tension to Mars in Mars's sign, and then Mars, think about Mars, it's kind of sitting on top of the South Node in the bucket, right? So there's this
Yeah.
quality of, and it's, the ruler. I guess there is a Mars mutual reception going on with the sun here that I guess we could pick up on, also going on at this time, which is part of the upcoming retrograde cycle. But I'm wondering if there is a bit of like being able to, I wanted to say like lessen the Mars in favor of the Venus, but now that I'm
Mm.
seeing the sun there, I might take that back because sun Mars together, like it's true. So just being very mindful of that, knowing
Being
that
very
in
mindful, yeah.
this moment of like around November 13th at the end of this cycle and Venus, being revved up in the name of justice to whatever someone's justice might look like, because someone's
Hmm.
justice to me, my justice might look some different than someone else's justice. And this is going to be an elongated story of Mars retrograding through, a very powerful Leo placement with Jupiter there in the south node. So, yeah, I would definitely look for foreshadowing, especially if it's aggressive or there's propaganda or, people in power are saying one thing and like being very righteous about something. Like it feels, yeah. So, but all in all, I feel like what you said before, Gray, about Venus being in this place of being able, people that are able to, if you are marginalized in some way or, oppressed, stepping up and really using this cycle as a mouthpiece, especially with Mercury, because Mercury will have retrograded, right? I see Mercury here at 5 degrees
Hmm.
Scorpio. So
Yeah, thanks for
now,
I was going to say that's the other thing. We don't have to go at great length about it, but yeah, at this entire period we're talking about, Mercury also goes
yeah,
retrograde. So right when
yeah.
Venus is with the sun at that powerful moment of like clarification and real in touch with like what's at the heart of this Venus retrograde for you, where Venus is revivified in the underworld. Mercury goes retrograde at the same time in Scorpio, and then Mercury is guiding us through our own Scorpio inner process. And that Mercury retrograde period is crucially ruled by that Mars
Mars and Jupiter and
coming
South
to
Node.
Jupiter with the south node. Yeah, exactly. So that's part. But what's amazing is that Mercury and Venus end up stationing direct on November 13th on the same day. So we'll start pulling out of it um, in that midway point in November. And there's some kind of that's just gonna be a really powerful shift. What in the United States, of course, there'll be like the midterms, and so there'll be some sort of huge political thing that goes on with this. And sometimes with these midterms, there's a dramatic reconfiguration of like the legislature. It's something we could see.
Mm.
And when you spoke about the Supreme Court last time, I was looking at what happened last time Venus was retrograde in Scorpio. That was involved at the lead up to Brett Kavanaugh being
Oh,
confirmed to the
yeah.
Supreme Court during that general time period. But then in the midterms that happened during the Venus retrograde is when that was the first Trump administration, and that was when the House of Representatives flipped and went to
Mm.
Democratic control. So that's the kind of thing we can also see
Yeah,
the
I
ways
mean,
Venus retrograde periods
yes.
play out with like big changes, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be huge. Midterm elections are it's huge. This is the thing that people are waiting for in the United States for that turning point. So that all lining up at the same time. I don't know what day, it'd be interesting to see what day it is. But
Yeah.
I wonder, let's see.
Yeah.
Midterm elections, how 2026 date. Give me the date, people. Um, November 3rd.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I forget so it's in there. But anyways, that was a very
Yeah.
good point to bring up, Gray. So in the interest of time, I'm moving us along to
Yeah.
it's not the hot spot per se, but it's an honorable mention at the end of the year here. Although it
Okay.
could be a hot spot, but is the November 24th, we have a Gemini full moon on Uranus as the Uranus
Ooh.
Pluto trine perfects within that couple days. So I think when we think about the Uranus Pluto trine and sort of these, surprise maybe, innovations of tech or perception or, like what's thrown out there that might rock our brains and rock our worlds. Unless it's just a crazy Black Friday sale, which I am so over with right now. Don't send me another Black Friday email. Black November.
The
I'm
worst is
over
that
it.
there's people that follow up the Black Friday with a Cyber Monday. I'm like, oh my God, I was
And then
already.
Cyber Monday turns into Cyber Tuesday. And now Black Friday's a holiday on my calendar. Like, come on. Come on. So, yeah, I just kind
Yeah.
of wanted to share this time period because we will be
Yeah.
looking at that Uranus Pluto trine.
Yeah. I mean, I was one of the things about this year that looking at it more minutely, like day by day, because when you're just looking at the big things, you just think about some of the stuff we already talked about, like the cradle in the summer and the Saturn Neptune, and of course, knowing about the Venus retrograde. But it's this period after, even after we get out of the Venus retrograde, and she's coming forward again as we come to the end of November into December. It's just a big, crucial turning point here. And that full moon, yeah, absolutely, being with
Oh.
Uranus, it's another part where this Promethean Uranian quality comes in really extreme. Remember, we talked about the first Aquarius eclipse is square Uranus. We later
Mm-hmm.
get that lunar eclipse in Pisces, square Uranus. Here we get a full moon conjunct Uranus. So Uranus keeps getting major lunation activations during the year. And this is a really big one. And it's followed by, I think you're about to show that maybe Mars
Yeah,
going into
into
Virgo, where
Virgo,
Mars is going to
squaring
station retrograde, and then
Uranus.
Mars squares Uranus. Yeah. And then Mercury goes into Sagittarius and opposes Uranus. So we get a whole bunch of stuff there, end of November into beginning of December, where um, it's really activated. And that particular Mars square Uranus will be certainly one to track because Mars is starting to slow down here.
Yeah.
And I think it's like what's January 10th of 2027, I
January
believe.
10th, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's get there. Yeah, January. Oh, right on my Saturn. Come on. Come on. 10 degrees of Virgo.
And when you
Yeah.
look at Venus is opposite Uranus in this chart. So there is a big Uranian component to all of this. We also had that, Mars Uranus conjunction that was real key earlier in the beginning of July. It's just going to
Yeah.
keep coming up.
It's still there's a Promethean build, I guess we could say.
Mhm.
Um, yeah. So, all right, Gray. Well, we are about 3 hours in here, so let's wrap it.
Yeah, let's
Let's
wrap it
wrap it
up.
up. I want to know, say we went chronologically, but I'm just curious, what would in your mind do you feel is the most influential, you know, period or, something that we touched on for 2026?
Yeah, I mean, if I had to say just like one thing, like one combination, even though I'm kind of tired of saying it at this point, but that's the Saturn Neptune, I feel like has to be it. But as far as a period of time, it's hard not to think of how important that July, August
Yeah.
period is when we get to all the exact aspects. I will say though, so I think that's going to be the one to really look at. But once I was really looking at this year more closely, that whole last part we just talked about with the Venus
I
retrograde
know
going into
it got
November
how much
is
more
is
important.
really really important. I think just though for the big collective trends and influences, what comes out of that, all those aspects becoming so exact together in July and August, combined with like the eclipses coming in August, that's the part where I feel like that's going to be major, major storylines coming out of that.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I feel like I know I felt the same way you did as we started getting into the later part of the year and kind of working in, the coming Mars influence and how just lit up Venus is. It is definitely a contender. And it reminds me of last year when we did the same thing where we got to the end of 2025 and we started to see all the grand water trines that we're
Yeah,
in right now. We're like, oh, no, this is important. Like you
yeah,
sleep on it until you start to
and
see it form and you're like, no, this is significant. And honestly, I feel
absolutely
like
that
this
turned out to be
period,
legit. That was
this
legit.
was the
Yeah.
most, if I look back on 2025 for my own life, I feel like, I mean, there was lots of hotspot periods, but like sort of the resolution period,
Hmm.
where really things started to change and shift was this
Hmm.
grand water trine. So,
Yeah, and that's
it's,
one of the things that's interesting with that last part of the year. I think what's going to be really influential about that is while all those amazing that cradle cauldron exact July August thing is so impressive, something happens there, but the fact that it keeps getting like kind of
yeah,
pinged and activated later by this Venus retrograde and Mercury like
Well,
I
and the
think there's some
personal planets. I mean, essentially, the
yeah,
personal planets are coming in and being like, yeah, all the outers and slow movers did this thing, but well, how does that look on an interpersonal, everyday level? And what does that
yeah,
change in your life?
yeah. I think that that Venus retrograde will, I think, be ultimately be very influential. And like we were saying, not just the actual Venus retrograde, but even once Venus goes direct and moves forward back through Libra and then
Through it,
comes
yeah.
back into Scorpio again, it's going to be really,
As Mars starts to slow down and
I guess that's going to be kind of like I guess personally influential because I think collectively it's like that big activation, like we were talking about. But then, like, there's going to be some kind of reckoning with the way everything's changing that comes with
yeah.
that Venus retrograde. So that's going to probably maybe feel the most intensely
Yes.
influential in some ways to us on personal levels, I wonder.
All right. So, if you had I'd say if you had one word to describe the year, but I'm going to say if you had one tip, if you had
One
one
tip.
tip for 2026, what would it be? Like
Yeah, I
make
mean,
the best of it.
it's easy to get caught up in these grand themes and historical patterns and overlays, people can bring up. But I really think maybe I've said this in other years, I'm realizing, but I think the importance of just what you're doing day to day and the really small moments and the courage to really step out with a new creative direction and really trusting that and seeing where it leads to you with a whole new development. I mean, major era of your life opening up and whole creative path can really be forged out of this time period. And it may not be the kind of thing where you see like the immediate results. I was just rereading, I wrote an article on the Saturn Neptune conjunction for the Well-Being magazine in Australia. And I was just like rereading it this morning to see what I had written. And at the end, I brought up how in July of 1954, which is about a month after the final Saturn Neptune conjunction in Libra, in that sequence that happened in like 53 and 54, a young unknown factory worker, Elvis Presley, walks into a recording studio in Memphis just saying like, "Oh, I just want to record a song for my mama," like, and he's obviously trying to impress Memphis recordings. It's what became Sun Records, and he does impress the secretary, and she makes sure like to invite him back. And it takes almost like a year before he finally records what you know the rock and roll classic, and that whole actual thing gets ignited. But even like it's going to be the things like that I think that aren't on the headlines that we don't hear about, just like
Mm,
personal choices like that to take that step forward with this dream you have. And maybe we're not all going to become Elvis, but even the people that do become Elvis or some other form of that, the steps that lead to that are going to be happening this year. And the potential of like the new creativity that can come out of this, I think, is really
yeah.
extreme. And so just to try to keep that in mind and do what can bring you that kind of joy of personal creativity with just like the small things you can do during your day-to-day life to combat any kind of potential despair about the collective things going on.
Yeah. 100% agree with that tip for 2026 because that's essentially what I was thinking is just, you gotta just go for it. You gotta like stretch your comfort zone. You gotta not project anything onto something, especially if it's new or what it can be, like because it's like the Ace of Wands. It's just like an impulse, and you gotta kind of give it a give it a go, put some energy behind it, step into, Memphis studios just to, it's initiatory. initiating the fire or the spark, and seeing where it takes you, because I
Hmm.
think that's the exciting thing about 2026 for me personally. And I'm already feeling it. I already personally have like the impetus of like this weird thing that's coming up. And I'm like, really? I'm feeling called to do this. I'm even having dreams about it. And I'm like, could I ever
Okay.
do that or be that? Or like, could I be competent at that? And it's a creative thing. And I'm like, well, something in me or outside of me is telling me to do so. And so you just kind of got to trust whatever that is, within reason, of course, and give it a go, because who knows? Who knows? Like I said, Grandma Moses, you just don't know. You could be the next Elvis. You could be the next Elvis. All right, great. So, where can people find you? What you got going on? What do you want to share before we leave?
Yeah, my website is graycrawford.net, Gray. You can go on there. And I also have a YouTube channel, Gray
Yes.
Crawford Astrology, where I'm putting out YouTubes. I have a Patreon you can join and read more about. You can also find on my site. I do natal consultations, so you can contact me for astrology readings. I do also have a course coming up called Mapping 2026, which starts on December 20th. So if this is out before then and you're interested, it's basically a course set to help you plan for
All the things we
what
talked
we've
about,
been
pretty
talking
much.
about. Yeah,
Yeah.
especially with the Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto pieces, and just learning
Yes.
about how transits impact you and what's happening this year and so forth. So you can get information about that on my website.
Yeah. So basically, if you want to take all the overlay of what we're talking here and you're like, what does it mean in my life?
Yeah,
This is
exactly.
this is
And
what
then
you want to
plan
take
for it.
Gray's course,
Yeah,
to help you get more in touch with the specifics for your life,
yeah.
and to start building that story. It's always exciting to do. So definitely go check Ray out and check the YouTube out and the Patreon, all wonderful resources. And I think I will be collaborating with you on YouTube, so this should show up. You probably see his
Oh,
name
cool. Yeah.
on the thing too, so you can just click it and go there. But yeah, so well, you can find me over at energeticprinciples.com. You could also find me at tarotofher.com, where we are, speaking of creation, we are in creation mode. We just got funded on Kickstarter for our second edition of our deck and our expansion
Awesome.
pack. We're expanding, which will hopefully come out during that crazy Aries period. Maybe I'll just be frantically
Oh,
packing
nice.
boxes and like get them out to the people.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so you can find me over there. And yeah, if you want to book a consultation, you can do that as well. And so yeah, that is that. Great. We did
Can
it.
people still buy the Tarot of Her deck, or do they have to be in
Yes.
on the
Okay.
Kickstarter?
Good question.
Yeah.
So right now there's still late pledges on Kickstarter that will run through the solstice. So,
Okay,
this will be
cool.
out before then, so you can kind of catch that. And then eventually there'll be a pre-order on our website. But that might not open until maybe January or February. So we'll see. So keep on the lookout. But a late pledge can on Kickstarter right now can get you that deck when it goes out first thing. And
Yeah, my
yeah.
partner Jeannie has that deck. It's kind of her personal deck, so I don't actually use it, but I've seen the cards and they're very beautiful, and I know that she really loves using that deck. So I know it's a
Yeah.
powerful divinatory tool for people.
It is. I hear that all the time. They're like, "Wow, you really created something, the just unique and special." And you can either round, so you can do them with you can pull them like lunar phases.
Yeah, I love that they're
You
around
know.
because I think I told you before, I really learned tarot with the Mother Peace deck. That's one I really
Yes.
did all the time to really learn. And so I have that circular card in my background of like
Yeah.
using that. Yeah.
Well, that's what astrologers are doing, right? We're working in cycles. Things are
Yeah.
waxing, they're waning, they're applying, they're separating. It's the same sort of thing there. So, yes, so tarotofher.com will get you there. So, all right, Gray. Well, we did it. We have reached a Saturn cycle, right? We started
Yeah.
7 years. We are in our Saturn square of year aheads, which is exciting. So,
Yeah.
um,
That's interesting.
maybe we'll come back together. Maybe we'll come back. I would say mid-year, but I feel like we gotta wait until until the July, August before we can come back to do a
We'll convene in
we'll
the
convene.
cradle.
We'll convene in the cradle. Oh, I love that. That's actually a good idea. So maybe we'll convene in the cradle,
Yeah.
and see what's popping off then. So, all right. Well, everybody, we wish you the best of luck in 2026. It's gonna be a hell of a year. So take care of yourself, you take care of others, and get ready to start the new and create what you want in your life because there's no time better than the present. All right,
There's no time like the
everyone.
present. I like that as a
There's
final
there's
message.
no
Yeah.
time like the present.
Mm.
So, with that in mind, we'll see you on the other side. And as always, may the stars be with you.